welcome everybody to the Salt Lake City Council work session for May 21st, 2019. We are going to be continuing working through the budget process for this fiscal year. So the first item that we'll hear from, I just want to direct the audience and the council. So there was a written briefing for the Cultural Core Action Plan update. Council members have read that, so that is listed on the agenda for those of you following along. I just wanted to make sure that you all knew that we, as a council, have digested that. So the second item on our agenda is fiscal year 2019-20 budget for Community and Neighborhoods Development Department. David, one of the things that I'm going to ask you today, if you could introduce your staff who's going to be at the table by name, just so that, because I guess we didn't have that for the report. So if you just, so this is accurate.
It is today.
Oh, then never mind. Okay. Yeah, as long as, so one of the things that as chair I like to do is just acknowledge who's going to be at the table. And so if we can get that information sooner, that would be helpful. If not, I'll just have you do that in the future. Okay. So Allison Rowland is going to start us off on this discussion. So she's our council office policy analyst. And then Jennifer McGrath is our CAN deputy director, or interim director. Are you interim or deputy?
Both?
Both. You are the interim director and the deputy director, but not the interim director or deputy director.
Correct.
Got it.
Brent's
okay.
the interim deputy director.
All right. So Brent Beck is our finance and administrative services. John Larson is our transportation director, and Lanny Egertson-Goff is the deputy director of HAND.
And interim HAND director.
And interim HAND director. Okay. Lots of interims here. Okay. So Allison, I'll turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to make one quick correction that we noticed at the last minute to the staff report, and you have received emails to this respect. In the second paragraph, in the second sentence of the first paragraph, we realized we needed to recalculate the numbers there. So I'm just going to read it out, and then you'll be able to check your red folders or your emails, and this version will also be posted online shortly as an updated version. So this sentence should say, the department's proposed general fund budget for FY20 is $29,671,376, which is 26%. That is $6,181,212 higher than FY19, including the increased revenue brought in through the new sales tax option, which is $1,043,283, and the quarter-cent sales tax for transportation, which is $4.7 million. So just that change to include the $4.7 million from the quarter-cent sales tax in the total CAN budget, because it is actually reflected in the CAN expenditures. So we wanted to make sure those numbers matched up. And aside from that, I think it goes to Director McGrath, or into your interim deputy.
Thank you, Allison.
Good afternoon, and thank you for giving us this time to present information on and to answer questions about the mayor's recommended CAN budget for next year. Brent will give a very brief overview of the changes in the CAN budget from last year to this year. And then Lonnie and John will each give brief overviews, highlighting projects and programs, as well as items specifically related to new revenue sources, like Funding Our Future, the county quarter-cent funds, and grants. We've intentionally kept our presentation very short to allow us to dedicate most of our time today to answering your questions. You can see that there are a lot of people in the audience today to help us with that, including David Litback, if he should be needed. And before we begin, I just wanted to thank you for your support this year, because together we've created some incredible opportunities to bring necessary and transformational projects and programs to our city, and we look forward to continuing that work with you in the coming year.
So for the key changes in our department this year, the majority of those will fall under the Funding Our Future or for homeless services, which Lonnie and John are here to go over in further detail. But as far as CAN's general fund budget, we have a few highlighted changes. We are proposing to move some of our software costs to IMS for them to oversee. We have 3 new positions, a building inspector, an equity administrator, and an ADA administrator. One is a transfer from the mayor's office, and then we have $40,000 for consulting funds for Fleet Block and Sugar House. As far as homeless services and funding our future, we'll turn that over to Lonnie and Joan.
And I just want to point out for those on the watching on the camera, the presentation is not showing up here. I'm not sure if it's showing up for the watching public. Okay. So I would like to speak to, and I hope you have this in your packets, council members, the housing, mostly funded by Funding Our Future, the launches that we did last month. Many of you were present for those launches. We have worked through HEROES. It's a home buyer program that provides to our service providers, including our police, E911, teachers, nurse, those folks that live within Salt Lake and work within Salt Lake to have access to down payment assistance. Pamela's Place was there was a ribbon cutting, or groundbreaking, excuse me, for permanent supportive housing that Housing Trust Fund dollars provided through the Funding Our Future revenues participated in that capital stack. School-based homeless program is one of the components of our serving our most vulnerable populations, part again of the Funding Our Future monies, and the housing program for those experiencing severe mental illness. And then also with our partner, The Road Home, the new shared housing program matches folks that typically under our federal funds that we have utilized in the past, we wouldn't be able to put together those roommates. So the Funding Our Future has allowed us to expand services based on those, a little more flexibility. So
Thank you, Councilmember.
So in our research, we discovered that there's a lot more service to like 60% and lower average area median income, and my staff and with some of the outreach they do with our community partners, it became apparent that it's difficult sometimes for people that are making a little bit higher wage in that 60 to 80% to access down payment assistance. So we worked with, for instance, our community partner, CDC Utah, and with NeighborWorks and with our housing authority partners to try and figure out ways that we could provide that mechanism. I think also in conversations with the mayor and other community members, identifying ways that we could hopefully contribute to lowering our air pollution, so keeping folks within the city that are residents and that work here, being able to provide that. So those folks have, we landed on, fire, police, public safety, E911, nurses and other maybe CNAs, teachers, kind of in that gap area. Does that?
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking about conversations that we've had as a council in the past around helping increase access to housing in the city for city employees, and you catch many of them, but we don't catch public service and public utility employees who I would bet fall into that very same category of income and what barriers they may have to down payment access. So is it possible for us to adjust the access through our budget to who can apply and participate in the HEROES program? Because I would like to see it expanded to
And this is the first
Salt Lake
year,
City
so
employees.
that's great for us to take into the coming year.
Does that mean no for this year?
Well, it's under contract right now. I guess we could go through an amendment process. We have already put forward. The CDC Utah is actually working with us right now for down payment assistance. I'm not going to say hard no. I can regroup with my staff and make sure that, you know,
Well,
if we're having troubles with giving it to the folks that we outlined, is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, I think that I instead of asking necessarily for you to go back to CDC right now, I'm curious if my peers feel this way, because we've had conversations about Salt Lake City employees accessing city housing and some barriers our own employees have, and we get police and fire kind of into this net, but we're leaving out a great deal of other public employees.
Councilmember Mendenhall, I appreciate you bringing that up. I have had the same thoughts, and it doesn't rise quite to the level of a concern, but I have thought the same thing, that, you know, one of the problems that we're having is because of the way that the city is, the cost of living is increasing. It's hard for any of our staff in the city, not just public safety, to afford to live in the city. So what if we were to do something? So if I don't want to slow down what they're trying to do, but since it is the first year, what if we were to have intent language that it is something to the effect that, it's the intent of the council that we evaluate this first year of the HEROES program and look at ways to expand that program, or to create a secondary program that's strictly for city employees during the next budget cycle. Could that work?
I think yes, and if it's, I would love just to ask for feedback, maybe not at this moment, but leading up to our next meeting, about the potential to amend that contract for, at this point, if you feel like there's some additional increment of funding, if we're going to expand the pool of potential applicants. Could I ask for that feedback from the administration?
Yeah, I think we can do all three things. I think we can do an evaluation of the existing program to see if there are any adjustments we could make right now. I think we can do an evaluation of the program as we see the outcomes starting to come to fruition, to see if expanding that program makes sense. And I think we can also do an evaluation of the program midway through this coming year to see if we can use it as a model to create a secondary program that would be similar but address a different audience.
So
I think we can do
Jennifer,
all of that.
I know that I've seen the number. Do you have that number right in front of you? I mean, what are we? What's the amount
HEROES,
for the HEROES program?
It's $100,000, and so
Okay.
that will equate to about 8 to 10 down payment assistance possibilities this first year.
And obviously, we haven't done this before.
Nope. This is
What other cities in the state have done this, or are we the first to?
None that I'm
to look
aware
at
of.
this? Okay. I would say, just so you know, I think that there is support from the council, and if I'm getting this wrong or misreading, let me know, to expand the program. Again, I don't want to do something that is going to slow something down this year, but that may be something that we want to add in addition to this, or even just create a public employee program, because it is something that is it's a real challenge that every department is going to have.
Understood.
I'm good with that, and I think that even though we do CCAC and we evaluate our pay of our employees, that there's still employees not making very much money. There's lots of them. And with the housing costs being what they are, I know it in some ways, saying teachers and nurses and firefighters and police officers resonates with the community, but our people who are building our streets, who we've just hired to double that maintenance crew and so on, our public utilities workers, they need the housing also. So that I'm okay with those 3 steps. I know that you left out going to check on the CDC opportunity.
Oh, that's what I meant in the
amend.
first step, is doing an evaluation of where we are currently to see if we can
Perfect.
expand.
That,
And then
thank
the other
you.
two.
And council member, what if we were to, if I can have staff, if somebody in staff can, let's start a list of items that, you know, are of interest to the council, to potentially look for funding as we're moving forward through this process. Let's add this piece, the public employee piece, to that list, so that if there is additional money, I'm not saying that there is, because I don't think there will be much. It's at least on the list for discussion. So, okay.
Mr. Chair, I have a few comments.
Councilmember Valdemoros and then Councilmember Fowler.
Just,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
pointing at me. So you said that, so there's $100,000 might be destined to 8 to 10 people for the down payment assistance. You're already working on a contract with CDC.
Correct.
And this is the only group that can provide the services.
It's
for
the
us.
only group that currently does that kind of down payment assistance.
Okay.
We felt like it would make sense to do with a partner that's working on that type of program already. We might be able to expand it to others. I would like to point out that we have a home buyer program that isn't limited to any, there isn't a constraint. It could be a city employee that can come if they're income qualified and go through our home buyer program.
Okay, and so you're kind of like, you're not ready to sign tomorrow as like this contract, right? Like it's not ready.
It's actually signed with
Oh, it
CDC
is
Utah,
signed.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in the midst of being implemented, but contracts can be amended.
It can be amended, right? So I feel like, is it not possible to amend that maybe we put a couple of this, a couple of this potential down payment assistance programs to be for public employees right now, and this amendment instead of waiting a whole year?
Yeah, that was my impression of what Jennifer was saying, that you were going to evaluate if that amendment could happen to include public employees.
Yeah,
right
I
now.
think we can absolutely look at that, as well as, like I said, looking at a way to expand it in the future or to create a similar program with the same model but for a different group. And to Lonnie's point, we do also have another program to help with down payment assistance that doesn't have any restrictions around where you're employed or how you're employed, but rather is just income qualifying based. So we are hitting that from a couple of different angles.
Okay, Cindy.
All right.
From a systems point of view, looking back at last year's appropriation language for funding our future, it was new to everyone. And the council, it looks like, put general language into the appropriation for this. It didn't specify, a program or what it's called, or it was just general, like down payment assistance. So there are cases, if the city is launching a new program, sometimes the council wants to have more input, and in those cases, then you don't appropriate the money until you have the opportunity to hear more about it so that you can give your policy input up front. So you have that option, or you can just go ahead and do the appropriations. Either way works, nothing wrong with either way. But I did want to ask if the contract is for the remainder of this fiscal year, or if it extends into fiscal year 2020.
It's for the remainder of this fiscal year.
So it goes until June 30th
Correct.
of this year?
Correct.
So just 2 months? Okay. So that, I think, was part of what you were asking. So there isn't a contract that assumes the use of the funding in this budget.
In the coming budget, the proposed budget, is that what you're getting at?
My question is yes. Is that contract related to this money or
Not
the money you got
extend.
last year?
Last year's.
Last year's, okay. So that's helpful to know.
Yeah, I didn't realize that.
So speaking to that, I don't know if it is helpful. Maybe we could scroll just a little bit up. This outlines all of the programs, and this shows both the current fiscal year and the proposed budget fiscal year, the various programs that we went based on last year's council appropriations, we went forward. And I'd like to go through this and maybe just have you ask questions as we go through. The two at the end of the list are the new ones, so I'd like to start there. The landlord insurance pilot we've asked for 350,000, and that will be, again, a pilot program. We have done quite a bit of research regarding landlord insurance programs. The state has, Department of Workforce Services has some limited programs. It requires some form of judgment, though, for the landlord to be able to participate in the program, and we'd like to potentially provide ways to not have a formal legal judgment against a tenant. We'd like to be able to hopefully provide deposit and maybe a revolving deposit kind of concept, so that landlords would be more inclined to participate in that. Go ahead.
Can you restate that?
Sure.
Because I think that's a very important point that I just want to make sure I heard it right.
Sure. So the Department of Workforce Services and other service providers in housing have some limitations related to a landlord insurance program. Usually they have to go through, well, they do have right now, are required to go through a judgment. So if there's, some beyond minor repairs or things that happen while a tenant is in a property, the landlord, the only way they can go into this landlord insurance program is to say, well, we need to have a judgment. So they have to take it before a small claims court or other judge. And then the landlord insurance program can be accessed, and that's the state's program. We would like to open it up to hopefully a larger pool of landlords to be able to utilize more easily, not have to go through the legal process quite as extensively, and be able to say, maybe it's a deposit, so that we pay the deposit, helping low-income tenants, folks that maybe have had some bad credit or other, not very successful tenant experiences, to be able to have that deposit up front, and the landlords can then access that money. This is still a work in process, and it is going to be similar to the other programs that we've launched in the past 6, 8, 9 months, in that we're working with our partners, Housing Authority, other entities. We've had lengthy conversations already with Department of Workforce Services to determine how we could, kind of bolster or augment the existing programs.
Okay, Councilmember Fowler and then Councilmember Mendenhall.
Is this a judgment against the tenant or a judgment against the landlord?
The tenant is my understanding.
The tenant.
Yes.
Huh. Well, I appreciate the creativity. There's just a lot of collateral consequences of having a judgment against a tenant. So that's all.
So I asked a question, I can't remember if it was in our last work session or in the small group budget meeting, about how, why we're allocating so much to this when the state equivalent of it hasn't been utilized, and that fund was intentionally shrunk. And are you telling me it's because you're going to eliminate the need to go into the courts in order to access that?
One aspect, yes.
So I'm wondering how we evaluate the distribution of that. If it's not a judge looking at the expenses, who is making that determination about which expenses qualify?
And that is something in our conversation with Department of Workforce Services. They have not been able to find like a staff person to focus on that. So we don't know for sure how it's going to play out, but
Okay.
we are going to be working on the flexibility, trying to help instead of hinder.
Mr. Chair, I want to flag this one for future consideration.
Maybe
Just,
if we could just work with,
yep, please.
sorry, to work with you to just get a bit, at the staff level, a little bit better understanding of it, because I think the use of the term insurance might be a barrier. Like in my mind, I was thinking they don't pay for this insurance. It's that it's like the city's acting as a guarantor. If there are damages to the apartments, then there may be cases where the city would help cover that, instead of a landlord taking a tenant to court. Is that-
Correct.
Okay.
So we
might need to
have
just-
more
okay.
detail. I feel like on time constraints, I don't want to read it all to you right now,
And then-
but could certainly do that. Good.
Cindy, and then as far as a staff person goes, who do you want us to, if, just on that list? Allison? Okay. Well, no, so we will, if any of you have other budget ideas, not related to hand, make sure Allison gets those. So, thanks.
Can we go on to the
Please.
building a more equitable city? Again, a $300,000 proposal to help us with meeting our goals in growing SLC. Goal number 3 is equitable and fair housing. And to build this equitable city, we need to eliminate instances of housing discrimination. This would address discrimination when their market conditions increase competition among renters. We hope that under utilizing these funds, we would be able to work with Utah Community Action, Disability Law Center, potentially Utah Bar Association, University of Utah. Things like partnering with these folks would help us to better understand the rates and instances of housing discrimination, and then maybe work towards programming that could address these instances and hopefully reduce the continuation. It could also be some funding towards landlord-tenant mediation, working with Utah Community Action. And again, this would be a pilot, so we'd be looking to explore capacity of existing programs and to augment existing. None of the funds that or people we've talked with so far have said that they couldn't work with us. At least maybe they wouldn't take or help with the monies, but they would be willing to help us with formulating the program.
Charlie, can I?
No, you have the mic, so as long as, until you give it up.
I'm never giving it up. This building a more equitable city, is this where the equity development planner FT would come in, or is that somebody else?
That's a separate.
I noticed that there's not an FTE listed here for building a more equitable city, but when I look at the proposed FTEs, there's some questions I have on those, but I was wondering, talk to me about the equity development planner and who is going to be doing this, who's going to be in charge of this building a more equitable city.
Okay, I will start trying to answer the questions about the equity administrator position, which we've asked for under general fund. I'll let David elaborate if he feels like I've missed the concept, and then let Lonnie talk a little bit more about the specific program. But the idea of bringing on an equity administrator actually came from a concept that Noel Walkingshaw has come up with, and I think is actually going to be talking to you guys about next week, this idea of digital inclusion and digital equity. He's put together a digital equity policy, and I think that he's giving you a briefing next week. But the idea of this was really appealing to the mayor, and what she said is, I love this conceptually, and I really want to create a position to look at this more broadly across the entire city rather than just in public services. So this person would really take the lead in developing an equity plan for the city. Certainly this program would be part of that plan. This person would be a resource to help formulate that or to help do some evaluation of that program. But this position would really ensure that that we have equity kind of in all forms, and that idea is at the forefront of everything that we do within the city and throughout our community. Over time, this person would really be able to do some data collection and do an analysis of how equitable our distribution of our resources here at the city are happening across the city. So looking at where do we do road maintenance? Where are we doing street reconstructions? Where are the housing dollars going? Where are we spending our staff time to make sure that we're really equitably distributing that work and those resources across the city so that everybody can avail themselves of those resources within the city.
Okay, thank you, Jen. And Lonnie, before you answer any questions, I guess now that that question has been answered for me, which I appreciate that answer, why what are the aspects of this program that amount to $300,000? But it's a pilot program, so I'm just curious where we're getting numbers. And it's okay to say you just pulled it out of thin air, because sometimes we have to do that with pilot programs, and I get that.
It was thin air during our first Funding Our Future conversation, and this was slated to be thought about in year 2. So we are now digging in to think about it. So
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Wharton.
About the equity administrator, is there a model from another city that we're looking to, or is this something that we're inventing?
I would say that,
I mean,
Thank you.
because I love the concept too, but before we fund it, I feel like we need to have some understanding of the measurables, to borrow Andrew's
Thank you,
phrase.
council member. Is that working okay?
No.
here, have my chair.
No, I would never want to take your chair. No, I'm okay. Council member, thank you for the question. Yeah, there are several cities that have, that we're looking to as models. Portland, for example, Minnesota has done a lot of work around equity and the idea of having equity strategic plans within different departments and divisions and having an individual. And the reason why we felt that this was a good position with CAN is we think of it similar to how civic engagement works. Civic engagement, our community civic engagement staff works with all departments and divisions in how they strategically reach out to the community and the public engagement. And we think of this position very similar in working with different departments and divisions to help create that equity plan, that strategic plan within the specific department and division, and then implement it. And so there are several cities that have done some really creative things, and there's a great organization called GARE, Government, of course I can't remember it. That would be a great resource if you want to look a little bit more. But yeah, we are identifying some model cities to learn from.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know that I have anything more to say about building an equitable city. I'd be happy to answer any of the other questions on the slide that's shown.
Maybe for the sake of time, we can let John quickly run through some of the transportation information, and then
Sure.
lots of questions, all of the questions.
All right. I think it's safe to say that these are really exciting times for transportation in Salt Lake City. You know, I have staff that have been here since the 80s and saying things like, yeah, we've never seen anything like this, right? Between the Funding Our Future and the county quarter-cent tax, we're ready to really change the trajectory for transportation. So what the slide that's up right now shows kind of how it's been historically in Salt Lake City. On the left, you can see types of streets that we've been able to do, you know, one a couple a year, and then on the right, you can see this is the North Temple corridor. So these are kind of more of the transformative projects. And that's more of, you know, maybe a once a decade sort of thing. But that's about to accelerate. And we've been working really hard to keep up with the changes that have happened over the last year, you know, due to your leadership and the mayor's leadership, to completely change the landscape for us. So these are the sorts of projects that now, instead of once a decade, we're just going to be churning them out one after another. You see in the middle, you know, the Ninth South project. You can see across the top, you know, the areas that are going to be constructed in the coming years. And you know, we've talked with you and the RDA board about this central chunk of you know, where we're rebuilding Ninth South, adding in improved transit service, capital investments for improved bus stops, you know, coordinating with public utilities to so they can update their infrastructure while we're at it. we got a county grant to finish the 9-line trail through that section. So we're really hitting on all cylinders, and it takes a tremendous amount of staff effort to make sure that we're coordinating and really maximizing our resources to be able to deliver the best projects and really transformative projects for the city. On the left, you can see on 200 South, with the additional bus service that the Salt Lake City is sponsoring, and as well as the new service that UTA will be rolling out in 2021 or 2022, there's going to be a need for an east downtown bus hub. And so the thing about where you have a lot of transit coming together, that creates the opportunity for really special places. And so there is some, growing momentum for really rethinking what could happen on somewhere along 2nd South east of downtown. We have a county grant to study that in the coming year, so that we could have not only a bus hub, but a full-on transit mall. You can see kind of an artist rendering of what maybe that could be like. So that's another transformative project.
Mr. Chair, can I jump in?
We're Mendenhall.
John, that rendering is awesome.
Oh.
Where's the rest of it? I want to see more. Who paid for this? Where do we get this?
Julianne could probably give you more detail at some point. I think it was actually a student project, and so someone named Brian Scott, somewhere out there.
I would love
Maybe
to
he's
learn
listening.
more about.
Yeah, would love to talk more about it.
Yeah.
But what we don't want is the typical suburban, lame, toilet bowl shaped bus
Did
hub.
you just say lame?
I did. I'm
Yes.
sorry. That's unprofessional of me.
He also said toilet bowl shaped.
Hopefully we re-render those kind of judgments and not always you.
But if we're putting in a transit hub in the east part of our downtown, it really needs to shine and really ought to be something that the community embraces and really adds a lot of value and is a special place, and not just a place to get on and off a bus, and not just a place for buses to park at the end of their line. And part of this is just, I've heard the analogy, in some ways Salt Lake, we're kind of like this up and coming city, right? We're maybe, getting close to graduating high school sort of age. And so the world is ours, right? At least from a transportation perspective. We're still optimistic and full of hope and energy, and want to do great things. So another transformative project in the pipeline is the 600-700 North Corridor. So that's the next one. That and the 10th North are the next two routes that are up for service. I was going to say increases, but service period, right? And right off the bat come in with the frequent transit network 15-minute service level. And so we're kicking off a study. We've already got the request for proposals is out on the street to select a consultant to look at how we can fix 600 North. Right now, when I look at 600 North, I don't see a corridor that I feel comfortable encouraging people to cross back and forth to catch the bus on. Right now, I see a wide arterial that is really divides the Fair Park and Rose Park neighborhoods. But the goal would be that we have a community-driven process, so that at the end of it, we have frequent transit network that connects those communities to the rest of the system, to opportunities, to jobs and education, and other opportunities. And then also as a corridor that is safe and comfortable for walking, and actually, instead of being a divide between the neighborhoods, is actually something that brings the neighborhoods together. Other projects that we're working on, we have an evaluation of the High Pass that's ongoing, and trying to expand that conversation more broadly to a regional conversation about what we can do to increase the affordability of transit passes. We are working up at the University of Utah to do a pop-up mobility hub to try and get more people in the Research Park area to get on transit, and how can we help connect them. Even working with them to open that up, hopefully in the next within the next month or so, to open it up even for scooters. But that's all part of the conversation there, and a lot of that effort is funded with for this pop-up mobility hub there is funded with the the Funding Our Future monies that were allocated under the work to transit line item. Under the home to transit or on-demand transit service, we are in negotiations with a vendor to roll out service this summer for that in the areas like the Avenues and Rose Park and the East Bench that don't have really good bus service and where they may never have frequent bus service. And then we are working like crazy, coordinating internally and with UTA to get our bus stops in place for the west side of the Route 9 service, which will be rolling out in mid-August. Putting in a bus stop doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but when you're putting in a bunch of them, and we're moving some parking to put them in. So for the people where it's in front of their house, it's a big deal to them. And so not only do we have to work closely with UTA from there, and look at the optimal spacing and location from a ridership perspective, but they also have to work with the people who are directly impacted by that. And hopefully people see that as a positive, that now they have a connection with high frequency 7-day service that connects them into the rest of the system. And we're also working with UTA on cool co-branded bus stops that would work with the overall UTA brand. So it needs to be, very obvious to people that it's a UTA bus stop, but also obvious to them that it's a Salt Lake City funded bus stop. So we're working on that as well. And then here's the last slide. Just shows some of the key changes for the Funding Our Future dollars between the current fiscal year and the proposed budget for the next fiscal year. So if you have any questions, feel free to.
So, John, I do have a question, or more of a comment, but I'm going to direct it to Jennifer because it's kind of a mix between transportation and engineering.
Great.
So with the Funding Our Future money and with the bond, we're going to be seeing more and more construction in the city, which, yay, that's a good thing. There are two examples that I'm a little bit concerned about, though. One was the resurfacing of 21st East last year. I know that the contractor ended up having to go back and grind down some of the areas because it was unsafe for cyclists, but it was also, you could feel it as you drove over it. I'd never seen anything like that with one of our projects, but I know that they had to go back and grind down some of it. I noticed the same problems, though, with the work that was just barely done on 23rd East between Foothill and 17th South. So one of the things that I would encourage your group to look at is, really talking to the engineers, and because I don't think that's our crew that went out and did that. I don't think that we're not having our new crew. They're more of a pothole crew, right? Or are they doing the resurfacing?
So the streets crew that's under public services does the resurfacing maintenance
stuff.
projects, and then our team in engineering does the reconstruction projects. So what you're seeing on 2700
So
South,
that's not, okay.
900 South.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? Okay. Councilmember Wharton.
Hey, John. Question about traffic in neighborhoods. We've talked about this a lot with constituents in my district in 2 areas and then or 3 areas and then an emerging 4th area. With traffic calming, do we need to allocate more resources to that, or is it just that the solutions are not feasible budget-wise because we would have to reconfigure streets? What can I do to bring those concerns more to the forefront? Because we're getting a lot of petitions, we're getting a lot of people. At the last Capitol Hill Community Council, there was a significant portion donated to presentation about renewed efforts to calm traffic coming down East Capitol Boulevard, and wanting to know if anything was in the budget to address that.
Yeah, I appreciate that question, and I appreciate the opportunity to have this dialogue. This is something that I don't need to tell you that we hear citywide, and it's a constant concern, and it's definitely something that is a concern to me as well. And as a father myself, I know it's not just kids, but I think kids are usually who we worry about the most. They're just so unpredictable. It's one of the things that motivated me to work in city government, is to be able to be involved in some of those smaller projects that can make a big difference for making streets more safe and livable. It's something that the Transportation Advisory Board has been bringing up to us, and is wanting to find ways to move this conversation forward. Years ago we did have a traffic calming program. It focused a lot on speed humps, and they can be quite controversial. And so it's my understanding, it was before my time, that we actually had a full-time person that just coordinated traffic calming efforts. And it was shut down, unfunded, and that person was let go I think it's just over 10 years ago. But it's, the problem persists. And so then the question is, what do we do about it? And one of the things that we've been looking at, thinking about, is approaching it, looking at opportunities to include traffic calming in our street reconstruction projects. So, especially in front of, places where you have vulnerable populations like schools. So that's kind of low-hanging fruit, because it's easy to slide in with, minimal budget impact to the project. But then, what do we do about the proactive projects? And so we've been, one thing that we've been looking at and encouraging some citizens to do is just to maybe use the citizen CIP process. And there's at least one or two that are in the pipeline this year. One thing that I like about that is it provides an opportunity for them to show that they have that community support, and it's kind of more grassroots. I've found in my short time at the city that if the idea comes from residents, it's usually better received than if it comes from me. And so I do like that process for that reason. But my concern is that it's still probably not fully funded. And so one thing that, just to kind of start experimenting with this, we did propose $300,000 in the quarter cent money to, we call it neighborhood street livability, kind of pulling back a little bit, because traffic calming, at the end of the day, it's not just about punishing drivers, it's about creating a street that is livable for people who aren't driving, right? And for the people who live on the street. And so trying to broaden it and think more holistically about how, what it is that we're after. And so I don't know if that's going to blow up on us politically or whether or not it'll be wildly successful, but that's where we're at.
But do you think, I guess sort of my question is, like, do you think having a traffic calming expert like we used to have, do you think it's time to look at that again, or is that not really, was that eliminated to because it wasn't solving the problem and it was sort of creating a misperception that this was a easily solvable problem that you just needed to hire one employee to do and they could just start doing it?
I think there's some of that for sure, because it's not an easily solvable problem. I think we've proven that.
Also, my understanding, and I also was not here at the time, is that it was sort of twofold. There was a political issue with the speed humps, like John mentioned, but also that funding in that position was eliminated during the recession. And so I think it was just one of those times where, we always have tight resources, right? And at those times, things were even more tight. And so I think because that program was somewhat controversial and we got a lot of pushback, that was an area that was probably easy to cut. But as John mentioned, we have we have some existing ways to get after this through the CIP safety program. And then we've also proposed, as part of using the new quarter cent sales tax from the county, that we create a new program so that we can take both a proactive and reactive approach. We can hit it from both sides and kind of come to the middle and see if that works. We're really optimistic about that program. We have seen a lot of interest from communities, and we want to be able to respond to that. I think it's a combination of resources. Resources means staff and actual dollars and cents, and also political support, as well as community support. So I think when those things come together, we can be really successful.
Okay.
Councilmember Fowler, and then Councilmember Valdemoros.
Kidding. To Chris's point, do you anticipate or could you see the proposed civic engagement specialist sort of in part handling some of these problems of just sort of reaching out when there are traffic calming issues, either people who want them or people who don't? Because as I was kind of looking at the proposed FTEs, that's what came to my head, was that this person may be able to do a little bit, at least in part, of addressing some of that, because so much of it, I think, is engaging, right?
So the civic engagement position is specifically a request from Funding Our Future. So that person would really be very specifically focused on funding our future efforts. That being said, we have made a proposal for the $0.25 money for some additional FTEs within transportation who would be able to focus on not only this program, but also bond projects, our grant projects, more projects that are coming from the $0.25 work. So we're really trying to figure out a way to have as few people as possible do as much work as possible, knowing that resources are scarce. And so we're really trying to maximize in our ask this year regarding FTEs.
And then I told Charlie I was going to do this, so I'm just going to. I just want to say thank you guys, because again, you guys have worked really hard. I appreciate the relationship that we now have with UTA, and being able to kind of create something where it seems in the past was a little divisive. Now there actually seems to be some collaboration going on there. Including addressing our concerns about a building, right, that they're building. So that's all your guys' groundwork, so thanks for that.
Thanks for your support.
Councilmember Valdemoros.
Hey, thanks, John, and Jen, and everybody else. So I just want to be clear on this $300,000 that you think for livable neighborhoods, and you're thinking maybe there are projects that are very grassroots, right? Like the community would come to you and ask for some funding for traffic calming initiatives or didactic ideas, which we've seen on Rose Park, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
There hasn't been any shortage of requests.
Okay.
I'll be straight up. My thinking with that request was I wanted to do a pilot on 500 North. That's if we're going to be making 600 North, I mean, two reasons. One is 600 North is, we're going to make it a lot more pedestrian and transit friendly. And often there's at least a perception that that's going to push traffic onto neighboring streets. And then 500 North is, I see Councilmember Fowler nodding. 500 North is, it is a neighborhood street, and it's one of the few through streets that actually crosses the Jordan River. There's a little girl that was killed there last fall. And that happens to be about as much money as we think we would take to take that whole stretch and make it really what it ought to be. So that's. I like that a lot.
I also want to say we want to be able to take two different approaches. We want to be both proactive and reactive. Like John said, the worst thing in the world is for us to get a phone call that somebody's been killed on one of our roads. It's extremely difficult for us to think about that happening and to live with that. And so we need to address those very serious issues that happen. We cannot put that on a back burner. But we also have a lot of data that tell us where these events are most likely to happen. Based on a lot of really clear research. And so we want to be able to proactively address those too. We have that data. We know what it looks like. We know where the biggest safety concerns are. So we want to proactively go out and prevent things like what happened on 500 North. but we also want to be able to be reactive to communities like we have been in the last couple weeks. A child was hit, thankfully not killed, on Westminster in Charlie's district. And so we want to be able to address those things as they come up as well. So it's about hitting it from all sides.
Charlie, can I ask questions not on transportation? Thanks. Can I go back to the CAN budget a little bit and the FTEs that we're asking for? I mentioned earlier that I had a couple of questions about those. And I wrote in my notes anyway, so please, if it was not always right, I mean, I think I am, but so if I'm wrong, let me know. But I have written down in my notes that there is a proposal for a civic engagement innovations manager and a civic engagement specialist. Was that something that was addressed that I wasn't listening to?
It was updated yesterday, I believe, with additional information from the department, but I think Jennifer can probably provide additional.
Okay.
Yeah, so hopefully I'm not going to mess this up because we have different requests for different FTEs from different pots of money. So within the CAN budget, we've asked for an additional building inspector for building services, the equity administrator position that we discussed, and the ADA administrator position that is a request from the mayor's office to move into CAN. Sorry, let me find all my notes here. Then we also have a request within Funding Our Future for, I'm just going to go off memory, so you guys correct me if I'm wrong. Oh, thanks. 3 positions within Funding Our Future. So 1 civic engagement person, 1 person for transportation, and 1 person for engineering, all 3 who would be focused very specifically on Funding Our Future initiatives only. And then we have another request out of the 4th quarter sales tax. John, am I right? Another 3 people within transportation, basically to deal with all of the additional funding that is outside of Funding Our Future. So the new 4th quarter sales tax money, the bond projects, and then our regular day-to-day work. So I know there was a little bit of confusion. I apologize for that in terms of us being able to convey that.
That's okay, but I want to make sure I'm clear on this. The Civic Engagement Innovations Manager, if I'm looking at the chart that was provided in our staff report, which is on page 3, which I think you have, it says that's coming out of CAN.
Yeah, so that's been updated since, I think you're looking at maybe a previous iteration of that.
So that's the one that is the Funding Our Future that you were telling me about. That's the one that's just going to focus on.
Yeah, we only have 1 civic engagement request, and it's coming out of Funding Our Future.
And I'll erase this. Thanks.
Sorry about that.
Councilmember Johnston.
Thanks, sir. I echo all the sentiments, and there's so much here that I like and I love. And the discussion about traffic calming is on my mind as well. I think for all the reasons you brought up, you know the 5th North issue, you know the issue with Franklin Elementary on 3rd South, you know all this stuff. I think I would be politically supportive of treating this as a public safety issue, because generally speaking, when it comes to neighborhood councils or any other groups, it gets funneled to the police department to use their resources to try and calm traffic, right? And they generally deploy their speed monitors, essentially, right? I would be supportive of taking street safety as sort of one of those issues and finding ways to maybe coordinate all these kind of things. If it's a position that you think would be appropriate to look at not just traffic calming, but also how do you keep schools, high pedestrian areas safe, et cetera, or other ideas you might have, I think this would be one of those core issues as a city I think we should address in a proactive and reactive way. So I'd love to hear ideas about how you would propose to sort of look at this in a holistic way with PD, with the other departments we might need to touch base with. And I would fully support recommendations you would bring forward for that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Second.
Councilmember Mendenhall.
Yeah, I'll third. And I love that idea, Councilmember Johnston, because if we think back, I guess about a year ago or actually more like toward the beginning of the school year, last August, there was a shortage, as there sometimes is, of school crossing guards. I know that my neighborhood school was missing a crossing guard for a time, and intermittently filled positions. It's been hard for us to hire crossing guards, and I wonder if we should talk about maybe putting an increased investment in crossing guard pay or some way to greater incentivize crossing guards in our system. And I totally agree, Andrew, that this is a safety issue, particularly around the schools. And with the city hiring and employing the crossing guards, and when they're not there, we end up requesting greater patrol. And that's an expensive resource, probably quite a bit more expensive than increasing the pay of crossing guards.
Before Councilmember Johnston, you go, I just want to address the crossing guard issue, and I've been working with John and Jennifer on this piece also. But this is something that I think we need to have better collaboration with the school district, because we're providing it's a city service, but we're providing, a service to the school district. I think that we ought to be working together on this, especially if we're going to be putting more money into it, because they don't have a lot of money, we don't have a lot of money, but I think if we're able to, pool some of those resources, we could at least revisit some of the crossing guard issues, because a lot of what I end up hearing back, it's similar to what you all hear back. There are a lot of, reasons that places don't have crossing guards that really do need them. So we need to get past whatever reasoning it is or whoever's fault it is, and figure out how to take care of it. So I'd be open to finding additional compensation to expand funding for crossing guards, but I would like to see more direct collaboration with the school district to figure out. I know that we did it with the safe walking zone initiative a few years back, so we can do this, but I think we're going to have to put more money into it than the city alone can do.
Ask a question?
Yeah, Councilmember Mendenhall, and then Councilmember Johnston, you go first, and then Councilmember Mendenhall.
Okay. When I said I'd be politically supportive, what I mean by that is I love all these different initiatives and I support them, and I understand that we are sometimes asking you to do everything and not stop doing anything. When I say politically supportive, I don't know the answer. I don't know if it's crossing guards, traffic calming measures, temporary, permanent ones in roads. I don't know implementation. I think it's going to take multi-departments. I'm willing to be politically supportive, knowing that there may be a trade-off and something else doesn't happen as quickly, or the resource gets allocated to this particular initiative. And I say that because it reminds me of sort of one of the core things that I hear about from just a neighborhood perspective of, if we're not handling safety, we're probably not going to address the real needs of people. Everything else is great, and I love everything else, but I think if we miss this piece, we're probably going to miss a big part of our role. At least I feel that way myself personally. So I'd be supportive of the trade-offs you might have to make. If you came back with some ideas that were collaborative, that things I don't know about, and may be creative in some ways. So thank you.
Thank you.
That's a great idea, and mine is sort of complementary, that maybe you come back to us with a scenario where if we were to look at increasing that pay, if we believe that would attract more applicants for the position, then perhaps there's something else that the school district already covers a portion of that we could ask them, because I think paying people out of two different places is really difficult, school district and the city. And if there's some other cost that they already share with us that we could do basically in a matching sense, to our chair's point, in an effort to share the cost to a greater extent. Thank you.
We can absolutely explore a partnership there. I also think, John tells me, and I believe him because he's a lot smarter than I am, that generally crossing guard work is handled within police departments. So that's another opportunity for us to collaborate and partner internally here at the city to work with PD to see if there's a way for us to work together to address that particular issue in concert with traffic calming measures and some of the other things that we're already doing. Because I think you're right. I think it's not one thing, it's many things. And the better job we can do collaborating both internally and externally, the further we'll be able to stretch those dollars and the more impact we'll be able to make in our communities.
Thank you, Cindy.
Just a quick piece of information for the council, and that is that right now, I believe that the crossing guards, while they relate directly to transportation and police, they're actually funded in public services. So we can, as a staff, bring those issues forward with the public services budget, the issues that you've raised.
Councilmember Fowler.
Thanks. I just have a couple more questions, but I think they'll be quick. The additional building inspectors, and this is probably more for staff than anyone, I remember vaguely in my brain somewhere that we had talked about either a survey or a study of developers about what was kind of hindering the process. Is this a result of that survey? One, am I right in remembering that, or did I dream it? Because I literally dreamt that I already had this council meeting last night. So,
You and me both.
yeah. So, yes, we did do the survey, and yes, this is a result. Is what?
No, I was saying I also had the dream
Oh,
last
good,
night.
good, yes.
So I'm going to let Orion probably answer the question about the survey, but I will say that the request for the building inspector comes from the fact that about 10 years ago, we lost 3 building inspector positions. And I'm going to get the numbers wrong, so again, I'll let Orion correct me, but I think, we've like doubled or tripled the number of inspections that we're doing and like quadrupled the dollar value of those projects over the course of that 10 years, and we haven't added back any of those 3. So this is an effort to try to get back to that given the extreme workload.
And let me just give a little background of why I'm asking this, is because I know that we've been talking about streamlining these processes, and that is where I sort of remember this survey or at least talk of one of how we can kind of streamline this. And I want to make sure that this is sort of a result of that, of the idea of streamlining these processes.
Yes, and the other part of the streamlining, we have been working really closely with the fire department. We've had a lot of meetings over the course of the last several weeks, and we've come to an agreement that we're going to pull in the fire inspection piece back into Orion's shop as a way of trying to streamline and make that process smoother for folks. I have to give a lot of credit to Chief Lieb. I think, he and I both came to the table with the idea that either of us was willing to do whatever it took to make sure that the experience from the customer side was improved, and that the phone calls to the mayor's office and the council office would go down as a result of that because people were happier. And after meeting together and really understanding what Orion and his team do in their shop, in the one-stop shop, he came back and said, you know what? You guys are probably better equipped to deal with this, and I'm willing to even give potentially one of my unfilled FTEs to help support that, and I'm willing to work through whatever process it takes to create that streamlining. So the mayor has asked us to come back to her with a plan in terms of what we need as far as resources to accomplish that, which we're working on. But the idea is to streamline that and then also to bring in an extra inspector to just deal with the workload. But I'll let Orion answer the other questions.
Councilmember Valdemoros, and then Councilmember Fowler, and then Valdemoros.
You can go first if it relates to
thank
this. My
you.
next
Yeah,
question
yeah.
doesn't have to do with this.
Thank
It's a
you,
different
Jen.
one.
I think I like what you said. We need, we need to have a better customer service experience. I guess the customer has to have a better service with the fire and the building permits. But I think it goes beyond just telling people that being very strict or extremely strict in a nice way, right? It goes beyond that. I think it goes, and I hope that this is just a suggestion, but we start looking at what is our real goal with improving these processes, metrics. Are we trying to decrease the time in the building permit process, that things can happen faster, that we're not extremely so strict that we're hindering projects that are coming online, and Salt Lake City is missing opportunities of development that could happen faster, and we're losing it to other cities, competing cities in the region. And so me having gone through the process with my business, I think my experience wasn't good, but it was because of the customer service wasn't that bad. What the problem was, these extreme requirements that may have been not necessarily things that could have happened easier. I'm not sure if I'm expressing this right. What I'm trying to say is, it's not just about the customer service, it's about really looking at how we all collaborate so that things happen a little bit faster. And if we need to be a little bit more flexible, so be it, so that we can reach our goal or achieve that goal that we hope it will happen in Salt Lake City development, et cetera. So.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of trying to balance the time issues, the flexibility, and making sure that we're really being wary of life safety issues. And so just really trying to balance that so that we get that perfect combination.
Okay, Cindy has a follow-up, and then Councilmember Fowler.
Just a little bit on this issue that has been brought up here with the permitting. That we just need some feedback from the council. Sometimes in cases like this, where there's a really good idea that has been brought forward, or we know that it's coming, the idea of consolidating the inspection function. Even though it wasn't presented with the mayor's budget, the council could ask us to work with the administration to kind of pave the way for that to happen, so that they're not waiting for a budget opening, or maybe say they're ready in August, but they would have to wait till October for a first budget opening or something. So be thinking about whether you feel like this is something that is worthy of a little bit of speculating on the part of the administration and the council, just to pave the way for this to happen without it having to come back.
So, Allison, that's a perfect one for your list.
Okay. And can I tell you why I think it is addressing those community concerns? It's creative, it's consistent with the council's audit of building services. And I think what Councilmember Valdemaris was mentioning is in terms of there's the strict requirement, and then there's the alternate means and methods that if the department has time, they can look with the developer and say, yes, you can achieve it in that way. And I know they do try to do a lot of that, but they are rushing. So there may be opportunities to at least give them time to look.
Councilmember Fowler,
Okay.
and then
Last question, too.
and then Councilmember Johnston, Councilmember Mendenhall.
Yay for all of you. Okay, I was going back to the hand budget, this slide with the housing. Orion, you didn't even have to say anything. We just skipped right on past you.
I was going to be so pleasant. I had a really pleasant response for y'all, but thanks for your time anyway.
Thanks, Orion.
Thanks, Orion.
The community land trust for the proposed budget is $500,000. Does this include the $250,000 from the RDA that is being transferred to the community land trust?
This is separate.
So that would be a total of $750,000? Okay.
Be a lot of houses.
Councilmember Johnston. Oh,
Houses.
well, I just went to you, so go ahead.
I agree. I want to be as efficient as possible. One thing that was interesting to me with going to Austin, Texas, was the developers all said they had the most difficult time working with the city, period. And it wasn't inhibiting their growth at all. I'm not in favor of making it more difficult than possible, but I'm also hesitant to attribute any growth problems we may perceive having as being because of only a city process. Like I said, I don't want us to be the problem, but I want to be clear and careful to say growth for us will have to also be unique to what our needs are here and the people we're going to attract to Salt Lake City. And at some point, we have to swing back and forth about we try to make it as easy as possible, and then it gets maybe too easy, and we have to tighten it up. And we have this sort of pendulum at times, and I'm a little aware of that. I'm not sure where we lie right now. So I just appreciate the effort to try to make it as smooth as possible, but not necessarily sell the farm to bring everybody in.
I want to jump back to that because part of my comment was after Councilmember Valdemoros, that I think the concerns that maybe we've talked about offline aren't about necessarily the developers who are on the Chamber or the Downtown Alliance trip, but really small businesses who are trying to start up or trying to expand and are having incredible hurdles. And there's a particular theme of which inspection or which inspector it is that, or rather the division that is a recurring theme and what is slowing up the process. So I'm curious about going back in whatever appropriate way. I know Orion stepped down, but going back to the conversation about the building services audit and seeing, I think the last time I had an update on that, we'd implemented a good majority of the suggested changes, and then there was a piece of it that for whatever reasons we did not need to, or we addressed in a different way or didn't implement. But I don't feel like we've really fixed it yet. And it's the small businesses that I'm concerned about. I wanted to transition to the homelessness piece of your budget. Is this time we could do that?
Yes, but Councilmember so I know Councilmember Valdemoros wanted to say something just to follow up. Do you not know?
Well, that's just quick. I didn't suggest that we make things easier for development to happen, and then we have this growth and we cannot handle it. But what I was suggesting is to make it reasonable, and that it goes with our goals of growth in our city and the goals that we want more people to live in our city, and we want more office buildings so we can have new companies moving to our city or District 4 in this case for me. So that's all I'm saying. We need to be more reasonable than what we are. Not so easy, but also not so strict that nobody wants to come.
Consistent,
Okay.
predictable.
Councilmember Mendenhall, back to you.
Yeah, so can we get to the homeless section on our staff report would probably be the easiest way to orient to the questions. That starts at the bottom of page 3. And right under the first, under A, homelessness, I have a little pause on the expected reductions in homeless service based on the projected opening the new homeless resource centers with that decreased funding, basically, without the RDA transfer. And I'm not sure that I want an RDA transfer necessarily from that fund, but could we talk about that? In the context that I see is that we're undertaking a transition that we've never done before, and shift out of the downtown core into 2 HRCs that aren't in the downtown, and we don't control or know the timeline of the closure of the road home, and we don't know the future of a emergency low barrier shelter to serve the downtown if the 2 Salt Lake City HRCs are at capacity. So I don't feel comfortable reducing our funding for homeless services when we're at such a transitional time and with some significant factors that we don't control. And I see David Litvak approaching.
We're going to have David join us as well.
Great.
Mr. Chair, if I may answer or provide some thoughts on that. Councilmember Mendenhall, I appreciate your concern. Just want to highlight that a couple of obviously we share your concern, and things that are Still in the budget, that obviously you don't see here because the key changes is we're still recommending funding the emergency overflow shelter, the St. Vinny's, this coming year, as well as the motel vouchers and the case managers associated with the motel vouchers, both for overflow needs during the winter months, which we've funded for the last, I believe, 3 years. Most of the reduction that you see, and maybe Lonnie can speak to Advantage Services, is not a reduction in service. I had the staff report right in front of me, but the goodwill, 2 of the items were one-time dollars last year that we're recommending not funding because those dollars were not used as intended. That's the Goodwill Biking and the MOST program. Oh, thank you. Those were intended last year to be one time. And then the other reduction is for many, many years now, when Midvale was the overflow shelter only, Salt Lake City was supporting the overflow shelter. So every year when it comes to homeless services and funding for homeless services, we are looking at what Salt Lake City's role and responsibility is. And we're not sure that part of our role and responsibility is funding what is now a full-time shelter resource center in Midvale that has additional resources that they did not have when they were only serving as the overflow. So that's actually the majority of reduction.
Do we have any obligation in that regard? It sounds like we don't.
We do not.
And did they anticipate our
Are aware,
cease of funding?
Yeah, the road
Okay.
home is aware, correct.
I had a question somewhere. Oh, Advantage Services. There's an increase and a decrease.
Sure. So the changes are related to and I'm going to also look to my experts right behind me here. The green team, am I speaking correctly, Ms. Schumann? A place for your stuff. I'm going to actually let her step in because she and I have been tag teaming on this. Is that okay?
If I may. As the city contemplated the fact that the main downtown shelter is closing, and while we don't have control over the timing of that, we did look to 2 of the items, A Place for Your Stuff, which is the storage program, and the Portland Loo service. Both of these were specifically put in place because of the location of the shelter, and with that closing, the idea is that those services would be sunsetted. With A Place for Your Stuff, that storage program, the new HRCs will have storage within the buildings. And then additionally, the Portland Loo, we're not exactly sure that service will need to continue as well. And so we looked to support both of those services for half of the year, sunsetting them December 31st. And so that's the reductions that you see for Advantage Services.
I understand that the closure of the road home is sort of a unknown, but a predictable at some point. I don't believe that we're going to necessarily eliminate the need for bathrooms in the immediate downtown area. And I think that I remember the trip to San Francisco that some council members went on a couple of years ago that resulted in the portable toilet creation conversation now makes a lot of sense as we're a little bit unsure about really where that need is going to be, but I don't think the need is going to go away. So I've been through, and you all have been through years of pretty intense homeless conversations and funding conversations, and I always feel like we do better when we already have the money allocated and then we end up not using it than when we have to do a emergency budget amendment to put some money somewhere because we've reached a crisis point, or we're looking at a crisis with a coming storm or messes on the streets. So I'm not quite comfortable yet with this reduction. And if you could help me understand what kind of a cushion you've built in for that unknown time when the road home closes and the HRCs are open and it's winter.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Help me understand how in the budget you're contemplating some flexibility for the time when this winter comes around, our HRCs are open, the road home is closed, and it's below freezing.
So as I mentioned, we are still budgeting for the emergency shelter, which the overflow emergency shelter, which has been St. Vinny's. We are also budgeting for the motel vouchers that have been used as well, including case management for overflow. So I mean, that's what, right now, what we're anticipating is that the downtown shelter will close in September is the time frame that's looking like right now, with the completion of the 10th West Single Men's Resource Center opening and operating.
And the bathroom opportunities for those who remain in the downtown core?
Well, I think as Jen Schuman mentioned, right now we are budgeting through the end of the current, the calendar year, so December 31st. I understand your hesitation in terms of the need to do emergency budget amendment, but that does at least provide some cushion to come back and evaluate. No one, I hope, no one is under any perception that homelessness is going to be leaving downtown. You obviously still have many service providers, including the rescue mission, serving that area. But I think what we're anticipating is a reduction in the population, at least. And so funding the Portland Lou through the end of the year does give us some cushion to evaluate and see whether we do need to come back for a budget amendment.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I
Yeah, go ahead.
I just also want to address just, council member, your concern about overall decrease in funding. I would actually say that we're probably decreasing in terms of the dollars, but we're actually probably increasing funding. So what you don't see here is the $208,000 that we received in the state grant, which is for outreach and neighborhood community building in the new neighborhoods where the new resource centers will go. And then also what we're allocating here with the repurposing of Operation Diversion funding for the street outreach pilot with Volunteers of America, which is really designed to work directly with the hardest and most service-resistant population of individuals experiencing homelessness.
I want to chime in on and with what Councilmember Mendenhall's concerns were. I have those same concerns. I know when we funded the toileting services a few years ago, I mean, that was a big lift to find that much money in the budget to put into it, and it has helped. I don't think it's, fixed everything, but it's worked, I think, the way that most of us who are here hoped that it would. I already have a lot of trepidation about, the transition from the road home to the 3 other shelters and how exactly that's going to work, and how, we're going to be able to continue providing services to, a growing number of people with fewer beds. And I mean, I think there are a lot of things that we just don't know how it's going to work, and we're going to have to work our way through that and make adjustments on the fly. What I'm worried about is with these budget reductions that have been proposed, we are digging a hole for something that could potentially happen, and we're basing these decisions off of an assumption of hope that we have, which means come December, if there's an issue, all of a sudden we're going to be scrambling to try to find money somewhere to plug back in to keep these services going. I have some serious concern about that. I do think that the time to make adjustments to our homeless service model is after the shelters are opened, when we know what that cost is going to be, because we all know that we are going to have to revisit some of these funding decisions. That's just part of it as the dynamic changes. What I'm worried about, though, is that we're making those decisions before the dynamic changes, knowing that we don't understand how that dynamic is going to look. So, Allison, we may want to. I don't think these need to be on your list, but I think we at least, we're talking a pretty substantial chunk if we were to look at continuing to fund those for the remainder of the year. And it puts us in a really rough spot having to do that.
Mr.
So,
Chair,
yeah.
particularly the part about people, a place for our stuff, we cannot, I'm not going to fund till the calendar year ends for that. I mean, we can't take that funding away in the middle of the winter time, so can we flag that one to come back to?
Councilmember Johnston?
Talking about the funding, is the emergency winter shelter at St. Vincent de Paul's the same as last year?
Correct.
200,000?
I don't want to say the number right off the top of my head because I don't
All right,
have it
yeah.
in front of me, but yes, it is the same as last year. Correct.
Okay. What's the status of discussions with the state of Utah regarding overflow needs and their responsibility to take the lead in figuring that out?
They are starting to have that discussion. So in a recent meeting of the Transition Steering Committee, they are starting to talk about that. I don't feel that right now the state has a plan in terms of that, which is why we felt very strongly about keeping that funding in the budget for this upcoming year.
Okay.
But to the state's credit, and part of that conversation is the state recognizes, understands that going back 2-3 years now, the conversation about shifting the system and the new resource centers did include conversations about the possibility for winter overflow emergency shelter. And so they are planning for that if the need is there.
I bring it up because I think the city has a role to play to fund some things. I think the question for the city is, once we're through this initial transition, targeting the funds to things that may be more proactive. I think some of the transition right now, I'm encouraged by to look at outreach some more, to look at some other things. I do agree, I think, with my council members that ending at mid-year may prove problematic unless the intention was to reallocate other funds that aren't used, say St. Vinny's, to offset that. So you may want to take a look at that piece a little bit. There are some unknowns. I think that the new resource centers will have a lot of things we're talking about, but it is a little bit difficult to forecast.
Sure. Yeah.
And I'm trying to be careful sort of to say the city has a role to play. I also don't want to I want to make sure that we are being good partners with the state of Utah and also not necessarily continuing to take on that role continually. Because I think their responsibility was to take the lead in figuring out the overflow needs. So it's a tricky balance I think you're playing, if that's accurate.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, may I also say, so one of the positions that we're also asking, one of the FTEs in hand, to Councilmember Johnston's point, we are always, as I mentioned, always examining and re-examining what Salt Lake City's role is, particularly when it comes to funding services for people experiencing homelessness, and to help us think more strategically about that, and to help manage the efforts currently within housing neighborhood development. We are the mayor is recommending a homeless services program manager that really designed to be at the policy level to help us strategize and to be more forward-thinking and proactive in constantly, again, examining what the city's role is, but how that is constantly evolving.
Councilmember Fowler.
Yes, I know I said I was done, but turns out I'm not. But this is quick. I'm just asking for a quick favor. When we go to the hand budget again, the third one down, the land discounts and financing, is there a way to get a breakdown of where that $2.1 million went in 2018 and 2019? I think there was somewhat of a presentation, but if we can just sort of break it down and see how many units that derived, and I know it shouldn't, if you want to maybe coordinate with our staff, if there's any, I know that we're kind of throwing work at you at the last minute, but it would be helpful for me to see that as we look at that other what's now proposed to be 2.5 million, and I think that is where the RDA money goes. I just need a little bit more understanding there, so that comes up to, almost close to $3 million, 2,750,000, right? So if I can get a breakdown maybe of where that money was spent in the last fiscal year, that'd be really helpful for me.
So you, just so I'm clear, you want both the Housing Trust Fund and the Community Land Trust to show those both?
Yes, if we can, that would be really helpful. I
Can't do it
appreciate
off the
it.
top of my head, but we can do it for you.
Perfect. Thank you. That's it. Now I think I'm done.
Okay. Other questions or comments about CAN's budget?
CAN's budget.
Oh, James, or Councilmember Rogers.
For me, it's interesting in looking at the Funding Our Futures money and how it's being allocated, and I feel like we need to start looking down the road on a lot of these issues. For example, if some of these pilot programs don't work out, what's the funding policy that we're going to look at, reallocating? For me, I didn't have an issue at all funding the 23 or 27 police officers last year. I didn't have a problem funding them with Funding Our Futures, but I do have an issue in looking at salary increases, the COLA, the cost of living increase every year. So I think that's something that we need to discuss as a policy, as this board as well, as saying, hey, is this something that we're going to be using Funding Our Futures money for to do the salary increases? And for me, that should not be coming out of Funding Our Futures. My second issue, it's not really an issue, it's more of this down the road look, this bigger picture where we have 10% of affordable housing money being given to the Salt Lake City RDA with the Northwest Quadrant, the Inland Port. And that's another thing that we need to look at. I mean, there's so much money coming in for housing now. Is this really, 2-3 years down the road once that money starts coming in? Is that what we want to be doing, is using Funding Our Futures for housing? I mean, we're going to have a lot of housing money coming in, and I think for me, it's really important that we start looking at that. What is the projections looking at for that affordability, the money coming back to us for affordable housing? And I know that's not in your departments in RDA, but I would like our staff to work with both staffs to figure out, looking for a bigger picture down the road, how we're going to do an exit strategy if these pilot programs don't work out, how we're going to fund increases for the new employees that are being hired. Is this really policy question oriented? Is this how we want to be using the Funding Our Futures money? So.
Mr. Chair, if I could maybe comment just on the broad Funding Our Future. Councilmember Rogers, I appreciate, and I know the administration will appreciate the opportunity to have that policy discussion. You mentioned the salary for police. That policy discussion is very welcomed. This year's budget is modeled after last year's budget, and so I know all of this is new to us. And so last year, in addition to the 27 officers, we also funded salary increases through Funding Our Future. So having a policy discussion about that, whether it's implemented this year or in future years, I think will be very beneficial. So it'll provide clarity moving forward.
And I think the reason why it is always on the tip of my tongue in regards to this is because when I came on board that first year, when I was first elected, that first year was after the property tax increase. And the whole intent of that property tax increase was not to be used to increase salaries, and it was. So that was a completely different administration, and for me, that's always been on my forefront of my mind, is that we need to make sure that this is not what we're using to fund the money, is that we're not funding salaries, we're not funding increases.
Well, and for us, I know that in putting together this, the Funding Our Future budget, the intent with the public and being true to the engagement with the public in all those 4 key areas has been very important. And I think we would agree that at some point to reevaluate the priorities with our community. All the streets are fixed now, so what do we do, right? I mean, our housing problem is solved now, so what's next? I mean, we do think that just naturally it will make sense at some point in the next few years to begin to re-engage the community about the Funding Our Future and seeing if there is a need to shift to other priorities.
Yeah, if we don't start talking about it now, I won't be here, and it won't be done, and then somebody else won't be here, and it's just going to continue to roll as it is, and that's not what I want to see.
Absolutely.
Okay, so if there are no other questions, thank you all. Oh, one thing before you go. So I did find out that the overlay projects were through engineering.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Those specific
and
ones.
it was a private contractor, but I've just received a lot of complaints about the 21st East, and then I just noticed that 23rd is looking the same way. And so if you guys could look at that, that would be appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks. the next item is item number 3 on our agenda, the fiscal year 2019-20 budget for the police department. So Ben Ludke is the council policy analyst who will be leading this discussion. Chief Brown is here, and as well as Chief Doubt. So they will both be at the table. And for those of you playing at home, item number 4 on the agenda, the proposed compensation for city employees. We have postponed that portion of our meeting to a later meeting. Both AFSCME and fire unions are still in negotiations, so we figured it makes more sense to talk about compensation once we have those discussions concluded. All right, Benjamin, it's all you.
I just want to point out there is a handout summarizing the IACP recommendations by chapter that should be in your folders. And the police department has a presentation to go over that touches on a few of the policy questions and highlights of their budget. The questions in the staff report for policy and budget begin on page 3. And with that, I'll turn it over to the department.
Ben, that wasn't long enough. Thank you, Council. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. Those beautiful graphics and maps and things that you had before that Council Member Mendenhall was talking about, that's not us, okay? We're just graphs in charge. We're cops. We're very simple. So let's just to kind of recap our budget and talk about some of the basics. Our fiscal year 2020 budget is $82,512,281,000. That's a lot of money. But when you look at the breakdown, 92.5 of that, or 76 million, is personnel. 2.8 million, or percent, is supplies, and then 4.7% is services, or $3.9 million. The bulk of our budget is our personnel and our staffing, because the cars don't drive themselves, the radios don't answer themselves. I mean, everything we do is service-based and is dependent upon the women and men of the Salt Lake City Police Department. So that kind of gives you a perspective. It's a big pie, but a very small sliver is really supplies and our services. Most of it is personnel. If you go to the second slide, you can see that from fiscal year 2019 to fiscal year 2020, we had an increase of $11.6 million, or a 16.4% increase. That's substantial, but what is driving that biggest increase is the Salt Lake City Airport Division. We have merged with the airport, and that increase is $8.2 million, or 11.6. The real increase that should be looked at is the increase of 4.8, or about 5% to our budget this year. When you look at the airport budget, just as a quick overview, again, their budget is very heavy into the staff and personnel component. $7.7 million of their budget is our budget now is staffing. The small piece of that is almost $500,000 for supplies and O&M. Now, if you break down the 4.8% increase to our budget, or $3.3 million, that what accumulates that 4.8% increase is salary enhancements of $5,042,000, a salary tax option for our new officers. Now, these are the new officers from last year, the 27 new police officers that we acquired. That's $1.5 million. The tax option for equipment was $280,000. The Public Safety Survivors Trust Fund, that's new this year. That's $47,000 that we are now encumbered to pay to the state. Police officers overtime, $34,000, but that is a Metro BLM contract overtime that'll be reimbursed to us. And then we did have some savings in our fuel cost savings and moving some of our software costs to IMS. Funding our future. For fiscal year 2020, the Salt Lake City PD allocation is $13 million. Now, 5.9 of that, 5.9 million is from the fiscal year 2018-2019. And that breaks down to the 1.8 million for our 27 new officers, $352,000 for equipment, $858,000 for our 13 civilian FTEs, and $2.9 million for our salary increase for all PD. Going to the next slide, funding our future for 2020 is $7.1 million. 4 million of that is for our new police hybrid sedans. 1.6 million is for the 23 new officer FTEs. 512,000 are for our body camera initiative, and I'll let Chief Doubt talk about that for just a minute.
So our plan is our body cameras were purchased with year-end funds year after year after year. And they're not on a single contract, they're on different contracts with the same company, but they're all out of warranty and expiring and starting to die and not activate. And so we purchased 100 cameras last year on what we call the vendor calls an officer safety program, which is a program that is much like a lease program where you get cameras day one, you get new cameras on the third year, and then the new cameras when you redo your contract. And it also includes unlimited storage for data, and then it also has the ability to auto-activate when you initiate emergency equipment, such as your light bar, or pull your firearm or a taser out of the holster. And then one other feature is with this particular company and some other companies, but if I activate my body camera, it will activate everybody around me as well. So we want to, with this money, we want to purchase 400 more cameras for the rest of the department.
Okay, so that would be 400 on top of the 100 that you already did? Okay. And how many of the old cameras do you currently have?
We still, the balance of what we have is 400 cameras is old cameras.
Okay. So you will, with this, you will have all new cameras.
That's the plan.
That will auto initiate and, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and some of our old cameras, they're first generation, they're old, they're antiquated,
Yeah.
the batteries don't make it through an entire shift, some of the wiring is getting real brittle and old, so this is very much needed, and this is the right side of history for a police department to be on.
Councilmember Wharton?
While we're on the subject of that, do all patrol vehicles have dash cams?
No patrol vehicles have dash cams.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So is that because of the investment in body cams? And does the body cams activate from inside the patrol vehicle so you can see like the vehicle as it's approaching, or like
If you're in the
that
car
work?
and you activate your camera, you can see everything through the windshield as the
Okay.
cars are going down the road. But we thought it'd be much better to have the camera on the
Yeah.
officer because the officer sometimes goes many
Right.
places the car can't go.
Yeah. Okay. Well, but it can still do the things that a car dash cam did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But wasn't that a funny decision?
What's that?
If you had the money, would you put dash cams in your cars?
I don't know. I almost would think it would be redundant for the
Really?
type of work we do, yeah.
Okay. All right. That's good enough. Councilmember Fowler?
But do officers have their body cams on while they're driving?
No.
I mean, because the dash cams generally sort of just started, is what I thought, for like UHPs. Don't they just start after so long? Or do you have to, after you initiate your lights or initiate something?
The body
sirens?
cameras and the dash cams operate in exactly the same
Oh,
way.
okay.
They're always running, but they only start recording when I push my button or I turn my lights on. Then it's going to capture the 30 seconds prior to that when I push my button or turn my lights on, and then forward.
Got it. So the body cam would be activated when you turn your lights on as well,
With
Right.
this new program.
with the new ones? Okay, cool.
And then 542,000 of that 7.1 million is for salary enhancements, and then 280 is for equipment.
Thank you. I didn't have my mic on. So my questions are about the police hybrid sedan initiative. And Ben, I know that you sent something but I don't recall what it said. Can you remind us what? So last week I asked how many hybrids we're able to fund with that $4 million, and then of our regular, either Crown Victorias or I don't know what we're driving now. But what are you guys driving?
Everything. We have
Everything?
some
Okay.
Fords, some Chevs. We have some of the new SUVs.
So
but,
how?
yeah.
So what? I guess the question is, how many hybrid vehicles will you have, and how much more expensive are they than the other?
That's a good question. The $4 million will buy approximately 110 of the hybrid responders.
Okay.
And these are Ford vehicles that are designed by their police engineering team. These are built to be police cars. They're pursuit rated. As far as how many hybrids we have in the police department, do you have any idea?
Maybe 20.
Yeah, we don't have a whole lot.
So 20 right now, but this would give you
110
110 more.
hybrids, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And with $4 million, how many standard police cars would you be able to purchase?
I'd have to do the math on that, sir, but I can get back to you on that.
Okay.
This is also a question staff is following up on for the fleet fund, which is scheduled for a budget briefing on June 4th.
Okay.
So we're trying to tease out how many vehicles, if it was just a regular internal combustion engine versus the sedan hybrid versus an SUV, since all of those were evaluated by the fleet committee.
And Mr. Chair, I know they have those answers because I sat through a presentation. I just can't remember them off the top of my head.
Yeah, if you could get those to us, that'd be helpful. I'm not opposed to the hybrid program as long as they operate. You have pursuit ability and some of the other things that have been concerning with hybrids in the past. So, but I just want to make sure that
Yeah. We actually have one, and we're going to mock it up for a police car, so we can bring it by and let you take it for a spin.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to drive one of those.
No lights and siren.
I'll just add, Mr. Chair, that the longer term trade-off was fewer vehicles in the short run, but lower maintenance costs in the long run, because
And
the
how's
hybrid vehicles had lower maintenance on average, and this is based on the experience of the fire department.
And how about the resale?
I don't know that one.
Okay. If we could find out on that one too. Councilmember Mendenhall.
Last week I'd asked for a breakdown of how many vehicles that are currently bigger than the Fusion would be replaced by the smaller hybrid type. So you said it's sort of a battery of different vehicles in the fleet right now.
Yeah, I included in the well, right there, that slide right there, that's kind of the state of our fleet right now. Those are the top 10 highest mileage marked vehicles. The average mileage on those cars is about 150,000 miles. The
And
average
how old would those cars be?
they're anywhere from 2008 to 2000, and that's really small.
2000.
12, so right in that area.
Do you have a mileage assumption or a mileage average for per vehicle per year?
Fleet does.
Fleet
does. Okay.
I just grabbed 10 marked and 10 unmarked, and our average maintenance for those marked vehicles last year was $3,780. Now, when we send those car to auctions, we're getting about $1,000 to $1,500. So we're actually paying for those cars sometimes twice over just in regular maintenance on a yearly basis. So we're in dire need of new cars, and I think it would be money well spent to acquire new cars. Another thing they were telling me about is the new responders would have a 3-year powertrain warranty and then a 5-year bumper-to-bumper. So a lot of the things that we are sending cars for maintenance and repairs would be covered under warranty too. And then the resale value would be a lot stronger at 5 years as opposed to 10.
Chief, thank you, but that doesn't answer my question about, are we taking some of the larger size vehicles off the road with this 110 swap out?
Fleet has a rotation schedule, and they basically decide which cars come out and go. I can find that out for you, Council.
I guess I understand only enough to make me dangerous about this, that different officers who do different jobs around the city carry different amounts of equipment.
Right.
And I've seen totally packed vehicles at community council meetings, and then we see some that seem fairly empty. So I'm just wondering about how, I get that fleet maintains that turnover list from a mechanical or cost standpoint, and I wonder what we might hear from patrol later about, I can't fit in my vehicle, whether it's their body or their stuff, but these are pretty small compared to some of the larger crossover SUV
Yeah,
kind of
they're not
styles.
as big as the SUVs. But we did have one mocked up with a cage in the back of it, and they brought it over. I'm 6'2", and I got into the car and had to move the seat forward to be able to reach the pedal. So they were bigger than what we're driving now with standard cages. So I'd like to get this mocked up and let people look at it and give it a go over.
Okay.
Okay? But yes, to your question, there are certain vehicles that, because of the amount of equipment people carry, are going to have to be bigger. Some of our SWAT sergeants, some of our EOD experts carry a lot of equipment, and they have trucks and things like that.
I guess what I want to hear is that it's not just fleet that's going to look at the list of vehicles in the PD fleet and say, here's the ones you're going to get rid of, but that there's a dialogue between your needs and your officers' needs and the fleet list of which ones to push out if this 110 new ones happen.
I'm on the fleet committee, and that happens regularly.
Great.
We talk back and forth.
Glad to hear it. Thank you.
So before you move on from fleet, one other discussion that I know as a council we've some of us have talked about, and we'll probably talk about later this year after the budget's over, is the policy of police take-home vehicles. Are you tracking, how many miles are driven both, on shift, but when if somebody is using their take-home vehicle, it's one thing if you live in Murray, it's another thing if you live in Santaquin, for example. Are we keeping track of mileage in that program for people who are driving off duty?
Tim, you look at that.
Fleet sends the department, we don't track by mileage, we track by gallons used.
Okay.
And then we audit that every month. And usually the top 5 people, their commanders go in and find out why they're using, if they're outside the norm. And usually it's just 1 or 2 people outside the norm, and they have some kind of acceptable reason for that.
Okay.
But we do track that, we do monitor that.
Okay, because I'm fully supportive of the take-home policy. And I want to be fair to those officers who do live in or closer to Salt Lake, because I know that in a lot of departments we're seeing employees living further and further away from their place of employment, and that's fine. It's a decision that everyone is going to have to make, and I would never say that we need to have a mandatory policy that all police officers need to live in the city. That just wouldn't work. But when we're talking about the need, the critical need of vehicles, the expense of the maintenance costs, for us to evaluate this program, I think it would be very helpful to know what kind of mileage we're talking, off-duty mileage we're talking, or gallons used. And, you may want to, or we may want you to look at a different monitoring system, because, if I'm all for re-evaluating that program and making it more effective and work better for all of our officers.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I think we need to be realistic about, lifestyle choices and where people are living, and what that means to other coworkers who have happened to make a decision where they live a lot closer.
Yeah, by city ordinance, we adhere to the 35-mile rule, and so nobody that lives further than 35 miles can take their car home. And to my knowledge, there are no exceptions to that. I mean, the whole reason for the take-home car was to respond back to an emergency. If somebody lives 40, 50 miles away, them responding back is an hour-and-a-half drive, or that's just not practical.
So I thought the 35-mile rule was, not the cutoff, but the where you would have an additional charge or something.
No,
if you're beyond
it's
that.
graduated on how many miles you live out from a city boundary, but you cannot live past.
But the maximum for a
is
take-home
so
is
those
35
that live
miles.
34 and a half miles are paying the very max to take the car home, and it graduates out from there. Anybody past that doesn't.
But anecdotally, Mr. Chairman, I did the audit last month, and one of the highest users lives in Murray.
Okay.
So we dealt with that. So it's just we continually deal with those every month.
Okay. Thank you.
For additional context, Mr. Chair, officers who live in the city are not charged at all for taking home their vehicle, given the perceived intangible benefits of having that vehicle in neighborhoods in the city.
Sure.
The amount that is charged to the officer when they live outside but within the 35 miles, that fee has been fixed for 10 years. It has never been increased. The Fleet Committee did an analysis about how much the city general fund is subsidizing, considering that that fee has not been adjusted or cost justified in a decade, and it's currently a 50-50 split between the general fund and that officer.
Okay. Councilmember Mendenhall.
I appreciate that. And then I've also heard that we're the only city that charges a take-home fee compared to other police departments around the state.
What's that? Say that again.
That we're the only police department that charges a take-home fee of the vehicles.
That I'm not sure of. I'm not sure.
We've had, as you know, a lot of public comment from police officers in the last month or two, couple months really. And I'm curious to know if it's possible to get that information about the comparison of the take-home fee. And I appreciate last year the evaluation you did with our police department versus the unified. But I also, there's other police departments that I think are we're competing with to retain our officers. And I'd like to know about the take-home fee comparison.
We'll follow up with the Fleet Fund and see if they've already looked into that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think to that point, I was briefed this week on the compensation stuff, and they brought up the fact that there are some that do and some that don't locally. May want to check with HR. I know they've done some analysis on this, I believe.
All right, so going back to the staffing slide, this is just a snapshot of where we're at with our funding numbers. Sworn Police Department members, we have funded 503. We have the 20 unfunded that we use every chance we can to overhire and to kind of pad our numbers, because by the time we get some class hired and then to the street, we've lost so many through different retirements, so that's very helpful. The airport brought 66 additional officers for a total of 589. Now there's one grant-funded position that's not on there, so we really have 590. Civilian, there's 120 at the Salt Lake City Police Department. There are 2 from the airport, making a total of 122. So the total FTEs for the Salt Lake City Police Department are 711. We are no longer a small agency. We are we are the biggest agency in the state. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Park Ranger Squad. There are roughly 67 parks in Salt Lake City. There are a lot of parks throughout this city. With the addition of the 23 new officers, I would like to take and make 5 of those into a park squad and deploy them as needed, hopefully into our largest parks based on time of usage and when we need to be there. An Intel-led policing model, a community model, but I would like to take that squad and focus them and keep them in the parks of Salt Lake City. Now, it doesn't mean they need to focus on the biggest, the 5 largest parks. They could go the Jordan River Trail, they could go any pocket park or any park we have open space that we can address concerns and issues.
Councilmember Mendenhall.
Well, this is exciting. I think it's not quite what the community dialogue I've heard is asking for, but it's really going in that direction, and so it's exciting. Talk to me about the appearance and the mode of transportation of these officers, and you probably know already that the community around Liberty Park, the 3 community councils there did a survey probably 18 months ago now, or about a year to 18 months ago, and had almost 500 residents respond around what would increase quality of experience and safety feel like in Liberty Park, and how does, and it basically asked for a park ranger were the results of it. But it was more of a park ranger feel, and it was one of the themes in that community feedback was that it's not an officer in officer uniform, that creates a different experience of park interaction, And I think in my memory, a big piece of that theme is that of all the different populations that access our parks, the relationship between different demographics and police officers vary. And so the desire was to have more of a park ranger feel presence in the park, but someone who's able to, who's, what do you call it, post-certified? Who can act as an officer if needs be.
Yeah, Councilmember, I completely agree. I think they have to be post-certified because when you need a police officer, you need a police officer. If you go back in history, the Eastside Liberty Park Squad, that was the Park Squad. We had a Park Squad before. It was called the Park Squad, and they focused on a lot of the issues that were at that time coming up in Liberty Park. But I would like to keep them in a police uniform. I'd like to have them have a police car, ride a bike, but they could be very much community policing in the parks that we work. The reason for that is when you need a police officer or when you're taking commands from a police officer, I don't want anybody to think that this is not a police officer. And then if we had to strategically use our other bike squads, they all would look the same. I'm thinking that they could, I mean, our police officers work the parks, they work everywhere. Our bike officers are very approachable. And so I wouldn't mind exploring that, but I don't know. I guess my concern is what is wrong with a police officer in the park that is very approachable and can talk to people about the issues and concerns, but still can be a police officer?
Well, I don't need to make up the answer to that. There's been a lot of research nationally on different demographics and people of different racial backgrounds who have different relationships with a police officer or the presence of a police officer. And we know that the use of our parks by different demographics varies quite a bit, actually, that we have people using our parks at different rates from different demographics. And so I do think it matters. While I feel safe walking up to a bike squad officer, I'm not sure that everyone in District 5 does. And so I think that was part of what the community was asking for is, but I understand your piece about saying if they're going to give you directives as in a police officer situation in the park, then you don't want someone to question their authority to do so.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate your comments.
Sorry. I was telling him he could go before me.
Oh, okay.
You go. It's all you.
Perhaps we can look at the issue and do some broader study and look at maybe other cities around the country.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Wharton, then Councilmember Fowler. And then Councilmember Johnston.
I just want to echo that as well, that that's definitely the sentiment. I think of many residents in District 3 is that they are comfortable approaching officers, but not all, and I know that it's not all. And when we talk about opening up however many miles of trail that we're going to open with rolling out our trail master plan, the discussion about park rangers has been different than having somebody different than a uniformed officer. And so I think we might need to have a whole separate briefing and small group meetings about that issue, because that's an issue for me. I'm not even convinced that these rangers need to be armed. So I want to hear, if there's evidence that says to the contrary, I need to hear that. But this so far is not what the residents are asking for.
Okay.
Councilmember Fowler.
Yeah, I agree 100%, and I'd rather take the funding for those 5 officers and put it in a program where we can, we know that the ambassador program with the DTA works. Clearly, we don't have that as a parks type of idea, but I would much rather take that funding for those 5 officers and put it towards an actual parks ranger program. My residents feel comfortable. I have kids that skate at the skate park that would not feel comfortable going up to a police officer, nor I actually think, and this is no offense to you and the work that you guys do, there is just different dynamics, and we know that there are studies out there that say this, and we know that it is just a reality, that I believe there would be demographics that stop using my parks, demographics that I like having use my parks, like my young skate kids that are over there that wouldn't probably want to hang out if they saw a police officer, but would be okay with a park ranger walking through because of their own experiences. And that is not to judge the police department, and it's certainly not to judge our community members. It's just reality. And I think you're absolutely right that when you need a police officer, you need a police officer. But I mean, it seems to me that if these park ranger programs have been shown to work in deterring some of that criminal activity and to providing some assistance, then they can also call 911, and we would hope that you would be able to get there quickly, especially with more of a presence with all of these new officers that we're adding to it, and with your goal of having a 45% call rate, I think is whatever it was that came from the study that we received recently. So I recognize where you're coming from, Chief. I just fundamentally disagree, and would that's where I'm at with that.
Councilmember Valdemoros and then Councilmember Johnston.
I think I am with my peers as well, but I just want to, I agree with all of you guys, and I think having that park ranger feel, especially, Pioneer Park would really give an opportunity for Pioneer Park visitors to feel more comfortable to be there, and so it's worth looking at it and how it's going to look like. But given what you've proposed here, you have 1 sergeant and 5 officers, and you said you're going to focus on 5 parks. What does that look like? What does it look like? What are these officers going to be doing? How often are they going to be at a park? Are they going to be in the bikes or in a car? Can you kind of illustrate what you envision?
Well, I think it's going to be all cars. It's going to be bikes. It's going to be different. It's going to be all modes of transportation, and I think a lot of it is going to have to be driven by the intelligence and when we need to have officers in the park. Some parks are heavily used on Sundays. Some parks are, in the afternoons when kids are there, whatever. But I think we need to look at, those are the main parks, but my point was there are 67 parks across the city that probably could use some attention if there are problems. So I would say that that's only 6 officers. It's not a lot. And so I think it needs to be very strategic in when they go. Right now, the city is funding police officers to work in our parks. We have an East Side Park overtime squad of 2 officers, 7 days a week. We have a West Side Park funding for 2 officers, and then we have police officers on the Jordan River Trail, 4-hour shifts. So a lot of it is based off of the time and the need and when the officers can be there.
No, I do still think that this park ranger type of idea at our parks would be way better than what's proposed right now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councilmember Johnston and then Councilmember Wharton.
Thanks, Chief. What would happen to the existing off-duty officers you're talking about under this new proposal? Would you continue with that as well, or is this supplementing that completely? Anything that's happening now would go away, and this would be replacing that in the parks?
Right, but if we receive the funding for the 23, we're probably 10 months away from having those officers ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the interim, we have $40,000 from DWR that we'd like to continue to use on the Jordan River Trail.
Okay.
And then I've talked to Lisa Schaefer and had some conversations, but I think in the interim, I would still like to continue with those overtime squads until we can get this program up and running in the spring.
Okay. I appreciate the direction you're going, and I echo my colleagues' sentiments. I think you've done a good job of trying to reach out to minority populations, low-income populations in my neighborhoods. I appreciate that. And you also recognize there's still a disconnect in some ways. And it's going to take more time, obviously. This is not an easy thing to work with. So I think there is going to be some concern of having uniformed officers in some areas of my district more often. As much as they want security, there's an ambivalent kind of behavior about it, right? The second piece that I'd like to hear more about is if they're uniformed officers, how part of the public perception of safety is a perception issue. Do they see them? And I know we use CompStat and other things to target resources where we need them at the time, which is important. but it also means hotspots tend to get a lot of attention, but we may not have that sort of presence of the feel of safety in some of the parks, even sort of off hours, that makes people more comfortable. So how would we track to sort of manage that piece? I'm thinking of my Jordan River Parkway and say all the parks over there, and North Temple, or some hotspots that may attract a lot more need at particular times, but also mean we don't see the officers elsewhere in the parkway. That would be one of my questions about how do we track that, about where they actually are used over time, and if they end up being in hotspots more often than just sort of being in parks as a presence. The second question along with that is, if they're not in a different uniform or something that designates the park rangers, how does the public differentiate between just an officer on patrol going through a park versus somebody who's a ranger who is assigned there? We really see in a different way. Does that make sense? That's just a question. I don't know the answer. If they're not uniformed differently or something along those lines, I don't know the trade-off either. If they're uniformed differently but are still a police officer,
Yeah.
what happens if they have to intervene and they're in a ranger outfit versus the uniform? Does that escalate, de-escalate? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So there's some questions there for me in this.
Well, and I can appreciate your comments, and thank you. That kind of speaks to some of my concern. There's only 6 of them. And so if they can't be everywhere all the time, it's going to be beat cops and bike squads in there. That was my reason for trying to maintain some consistency in the parks. And like I say, the Ranger Squad, we can certainly look at it. We've got 10 and a half months to decide what it's going to be and how it's going to be deployed. But my thoughts were, for consistency, it was kind of the same thing we did with the airport. We re-uniformed them so they looked exactly like us. And just the mere presence of a police officer sometimes will curb a lot of criminal activity.
I think I like the direction you're going. I support it. I do want to have that ongoing discussion, particularly, I'll say just the west side as a general statement, just knowing that we have a majority minority population over there that have a different ambiguity about police officers sometimes, and make sure we do more outreach and get some feedback about the Jordan River, Jordan Park. Some of those parks may have a slightly different feel and need. I don't want to be too complicated in this implementation, but I don't want to overlook some of the differences that may come up.
Yeah. Thank you.
So on the Park Squad ranger issue, it sounds like there's, the majority of the council seems to be in a different spot from what has been proposed. So the question then that I have for my colleagues is, if that is the case, if the majority is looking at wanting non-uniform police, I would have a very, very hard time asking our police officers to put on either a park uniform or going undercover. The job of a police officer is to be a police officer. If we want to look at creating a park squad, then that is a discussion that I'm more than happy to have, but I think it's unfair to put it on the police department to try to figure. I mean, we've asked the police department to figure out what their park solution is. This is the solution that they have come up with. If we don't like it, then we can have that discussion about doing a separate park squad, but it shouldn't be under the police department. It should be under public services or parks, in my opinion. Am I reading what you're all commenting? Or am I
Mr. Chair,
reading something
if I could just interrupt for just a second. That was our concern too.
Yeah.
And I think the reason that it landed in our lap is because someone wanted them to have police authority.
Well, I remember when we were having that discussion, and it was initially about police, but then it was kind of more, like, well, we want police, but we don't want you to be police. I don't think that works. It's not fair to your people. So, if we want to have a ranger discussion, let's have a ranger discussion. Understanding that it's going to have to be done differently than this, because yeah, Chris.
I can't, I don't speak for everybody, but I felt like the ranger conversation has always been about rangers. I don't feel that and again, this has nothing to do with the service that our police officers provide, but this is not the program that the residents were asking for, and it's I feel like only when the only time we've gotten details about it up until now has been when I've asked, and this has still been different than the answers that I was given. Last time it was going to be 1 ranger, maybe 2. Now, I mean, I know you're saying 6, and that is a lot for 6 officers to cover, but that's significantly more than what was represented to me would even be considered under the plan, and that this wasn't on-duty officers. This was in addition, we would hire off-duty officers and offer that to them first. But I guess to answer your question, I'm saying yes, you're correct. We need to have a different discussion about this, and no, this is not the program that was asked for.
Councilmember Fowler.
Just to that, I was in the same meeting with Chris when we had a previous update, and it was different than this looks like. And I certainly don't want you, Chief Brown or Chief Doubt, to. I appreciate you taking the effort to try to solve the problem that I do believe just sort of landed in your lap. But I'm with Chris in the fact that this just isn't what my residents would want. I think that you do have some police officers that still patrol via bike on some of our parks, and that is a benefit to see that and that presence sometimes. But having a presence, there was this idea in the discussion that I remember having and was a part of was more of a park ranger idea, less of a police officer. But again, so I'm just agreeing with Councilmember Wharton and saying I appreciate you taking the time to try to solve this problem. It just, and it's not your, I think what we're saying is I don't know that it's your problem to solve necessarily, but thank you for that effort.
So is the conversation about being armed or not, or uniformed or not?
No, I mean, the way that I'm hearing it is that we have, there's the idea of a park ranger program where, which we don't have. I mean, that's the thing. So we're gonna have to create a new program in doing this. I think you were filling a void, and it sounds like you were doing a good job trying to fill it, but it's different from what people are thinking, and so it would probably just so that if we don't want police officers in the park or police officers acting as rangers, then let's look at a different program. That's what I would say. Other thoughts from council members?
Creating a new program without any plan for funding for that is problematic to me. I agree. I don't know where it lands, which way I go on the police versus a non-officer responsibility. I think for my issue right now is that I think the police offer the right need I have on the Jordan Parkway and some of my parks. I think the problem is that there's a perception issue with a lot of communities of color in my neighborhood. And it's something that's being worked on, for a number of years. I know you're trying hard at it. I would be looking for some way to mitigate that perception so that the police could be a benefit more than maybe a perceived hindrance to some people who avoid you perhaps or see you and go the other direction. Not because they're doing anything wrong, but because they are fearful of things that have nothing to do with you. Immigration issues particularly, right? That's a perception problem we've got, and it's not necessarily your problem because you've been very clear about where we stand on this. That's my concern, I guess. Chair Luke, I don't see us being able to fund a full program outside of here. I just want to make sure we're very, very, very sensitive to the offsetting, what we may be losing by doing that in some of the parks. So.
Well, and maybe we should look at what is being gleaned by the officers that are working the overtime right now, because they're being asked to do police officer work. They're being asked to a lot of the restrooms are being used to sleep in overnight, and they need them locked and cleared. Trespassing in the park. I mean, they're doing police work in the parks, and that is what Parks has been asking for a long time. So you're right, we're trying to find that niche. And maybe it's a combination of both. I don't know. I can appreciate what you're saying and what your constituents want, but at the end of the day, we're doing a lot of police work in the parks.
Can I offer the combination approach that you just mentioned? We have developed an awesome program in the last 4 years, combining social workers with officers when they're going out on specific calls. And what if we approach it from that lens, that we increase our social worker officer capacity to oversee our parks, so that there is a balance in the skills and the technique, sort of. I think that's part of why we combine social workers with officers. And that when I think about what are we trying to solve for in our parks, it isn't just that criminal activity, but it's a feeling of safety and also a desire to connect people in need with resources, whether they fell and skinned their knee while they're rollerblading, or they are confused and there's some mental health issues, or they're camping in the park.
Right.
We don't always need an officer. So what do you think about expanding sort of that CCC PD role to the parks?
We can certainly look at that. I know that the co-responder model, they work a lot in the parks, because that is where a lot of the very shelter-resistant people are that we contact, every day, trying to get them into services. So,
but if we want to focus people, this team rather, and try to keep them in the parks, because as it is today, they can flex anywhere in the city.
yeah.
We want to focus them on the parks.
But under that model, would they'd be police officers working with social workers in parks?
Yeah, and I guess I'm throwing that out there for us to get back to.
And this is where I think we may want to just table this conversation, because I don't think we can resolve it today. My concern, though, is that if we are thinking that we're going to have, that the purpose of park rangers is to create a public safety presence, the only way to do that is with a uniformed officer. Because if you, with the safety piece, because if not, you are asking somebody who does not have the ability to do that, to resolve a safety issue.
Mr. Chair, I would disagree with that. I think without the resource, perhaps, I think most of my concern is deterrence. And it doesn't mean you have to intervene and arrest or do that by force. It's the presence of somebody who's in a uniform, who's in official capacity, deters some issues there, and that's where I go.
But a park ranger is different than a camp host.
Oh, sure, but
it sounds like what you guys are talking about is you want camp hosts to walk around and make people feel good, which is fine, which is good, but it doesn't. It's not a public safety issue.
No, but
I mean, if we want a park host, then let's have that conversation. But if we're talking about public safety, I don't know how you have public safety without a police officer.
Well,
I know that there's a lot of stuff that we can do with perception and things like that, but these are the tools that we have to work with. I mean, in a perfect world, we can create some other program, but
I don't think it's one or the other, though. I mean, I don't think it's one of those extremes, though, Charlie. I think we'd have to think outside of that and figure out something in the middle, because a responder model means there's an issue happening that has to be responded to. I think Aaron's point is interesting. I think it wouldn't be what the CC is, though, because that is responding to a specific issue that's called in, generally speaking. And as a social worker, I'm not going to respond in a park very well. I mean, I'm not going to do what we need in the park, just speaking as a social worker. So no offense to any social workers out there. And so I think, Charlie, you're right. I don't know if we have a model in my head that works. Maybe we have to look outside of this. I'm just saying that there's something in the middle that might fit, but I'm not sure exactly what it is. We have to talk some more about it.
Yeah. So I would, let's plan on having that conversation. But what I'm hearing just sounds like requiring more people and more money than just hiring police officers, and that's okay. if that is a priority that we choose to make, understanding that we're limited on funds and that, you know, having that model is going to cost something that we'll take from somewhere else. I think the notion that if we do this, we're not going to have police officers in our parks is not the case. I mean, what it sounds like is, you know, you'll still have to have police officers who are going to deal with the criminal aspect that you know, I'm hearing residents say that they want done, but then you're going to also have people who don't have any authority to do anything other than make people feel good until they actually need something, some protection, and then all of a sudden they realize they can't do anything, and then we have the police who get called again. So, so let's move on from this piece, because I don't think we're going to resolve it tonight. Oh, Amy.
Yeah, well, I won't talk about our camp hosts, as you put it, because I do think there's a middle ground. But what I would like to
I want to hear it. I mean, talk about it, because
we can talk about it offline. We're not going to solve it here. Not today. I do have a question, though, about there was a comment about getting to this 43%, and that not every of the 27 police officers from last year, the 23 police officers from this year would be on patrol and responding. And I don't need a breakdown of that right now, but I am curious of where they might be and which ones would be responding. I think, as we've been hearing, part of the issue, or part of the reason I think we funded police officers was that in a lot of ways, the presence and the appearance, having a police officer drive around a neighborhood, I mean, there's studies that say the police officers who take their cars home, that there is a decrease in criminal activity. Apparently, Siri's gonna text Charlie everything I just said. So I would be interested in knowing how many of those officers, the potential of 50 with last year's funding and this potential funding, are going to be patrolling, are going to be in that taking those calls.
Yeah.
Because that's, I think, why the council funded it at the time, or wanted to fund it, right, is because there's an increased presence.
Right.
And this also goes back to something that Andrew brought up, but I was thinking maybe in a broader sense. He said something about maybe tracking if it ends up funding and you put police officers in parks, coming up with some sort of tracking component or understanding what parks they're in and where and how many. I'd like to maybe inquire about that same sort of statistic, but in our patrol cars and on our bikes, and where we're kind of spending some time, just so we can see where that presence is, and maybe start to make some decisions in that way as well, if that makes sense. And again,
Yeah.
that's kind of a future maybe
Well,
reporting
we actually
thing.
have, Councilmember Fowler, we have AVL in the cars. And you can see the spaghetti noodles that go all over the city as they go through the neighborhood. So that's available right now. We can see where cars are all the time.
Well, and maybe if we just were able to compile a 6-month or something type of analysis of where the presence of those vehicles are, so that we can start to understand that a little bit more, because it also helps, in my position or in my mind, answer some questions to constituents, right? And to people that are coming to ask us about these things. And then my third thing, again, these aren't questions, more of just like future, is, crap, now I forgot. Hold, please. That was in here. Oh.
You're out of time.
Can we, I'm curious about, actually, you know what? We'll talk about that later.
Okay. Just real quick on the IACP study, we have it back. I know you haven't had it for a long time. It's about 200 pages. It's very in-depth, and they've gone through a lot of things. And they've done a workflow model that I know you were asking about. We were kind of taking a swag guess as how many cops we needed. But they definitely said we need more cops in the neighborhood. And it was to the tune of about 60 more cops. And so what we've done, and it's no fault of anybody's, over the last 20 years in the police department, we've become a very strategic, deployed police department. If we have a gang problem, we took 6 guys out of patrol, made them a gang unit, and sent them out. Or we did, vice or narcs or whatever problem we had. bike officers. And so we put our resources very strategically on problems. But what we forgot is that there was all the citizens that needed our help. They were calling for service, and that left patrol very thin. So this study pointed that out and said, look, you need to go from your strategic deployment model. That's good work and needs to be done, but you need to either refocus what they do to calls for service, because that is your number one priority, is to answer those calls for service that citizens make. Second to that is to investigate their crimes through detectives. And so they mentioned if we could have and we felt like about 45% of our officers' time was committed to taking calls. The other could be administrative, and the other could be free time, going through the parks, going through the neighborhoods, making the citizen contacts, things like that. So we have begun a strategy of taking and downsizing some of these units, looking, there's no golden squad that's not to be touched or looked at, but to look at how many resources we can put back to patrol. So if you really look at the hard numbers, the 27 and the 23, all 50 would be going back to patrol. Now, some of those would backfill, but we're trying to put back 60 officers to patrol. And to that point, I would like, if you have the time, to do some small groups to talk about the study, or I will bring back the doctor and the professor that put the study together. If we can get everybody together, we can do a presentation. Okay?
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Wharton.
While we're talking about perceptions of safety, during the Funding Our Future, we talked a lot about how we thought that we could encourage more public safety by returning more to the beat model. So will these officers that are going onto the force, will any of them be added to like the community intelligence unit, or are they going to be still assigned to beats? How is that facet of the plan fitting in with your new budget?
They're going to go back to the beat model, our community policing, answering calls for service.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they're going to be more like assigned to different areas where they'll get to know the residents better and things like that, so that maybe people recognize them more.
Right, and if we get that many police officers back in patrol, we'll have rovers, we'll have different officers that can do different things at different times. That'll fill up the beats, and that'll help.
And then, I mean, is there enough funding available for our officers to be getting, de-escalation training, and for them to be getting support for when they are involved in the high conflict incidents? Maybe they're having PTSD, things like that. I mean, is that adequately accounted for, do you feel, in your budget?
Yeah, in the workflow model that IACP did, they looked at the number of hours. I mean, 52 weeks, 40 hours a week is 2,080 hours that we can work. But then they took out all the trainings we go to, de-escalation, all the leave we have, vacations, holidays, sick, all those things, PTSD, and they came up with an average, and they built the number of officers that are supposed to be back into patrol around what we have available. And so that's being accounted for.
Okay, because I mean, it was exciting earlier when you said, that, we're running the biggest force in the state, and I think we're running an exemplary force, and I want that to include a force that is sensitive to communities of color and to concerns about perceptions of safety and approachability of officers, and officers being there to help reduce conflict rather than increase. All of those good things, I want that to be included in how we measure being the best department in the state.
Well, thank you.
Thanks.
Other questions about the police budget? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Really
Thank you,
appreciate
Council.
your time.
Appreciate your questions.
All right, so if you look at the agenda and you look at your watch, we are not doing well. So we do have a couple of board applicants who have been here. We are late there. I was going to ask them to sit through the golf discussion, but since we're already later than I had hoped, let's go ahead and do board appointments right now. I do want to handle the golf discussion, so we will do that after. And then there also is a limited closed session that we will do during the dinner break. There is a pretty good chance, though, that we're going to have to delay the start of the formal meeting by about 15 minutes. I don't want to go past 7:15 for a start for that meeting, so we have a lot to cover in an hour. Okay. All right, so let's bring forward, let's see. Okay. I want to do this. Let's have Leslie come forward and Jared Jones come forward. These are both applicants for the Arts Council Board, and we'll handle their interview and discussion together, and then we will do this. You what? Oh, these are different. Okay. Never mind. Well, you can sit there together, but we'll talk to you separately. So. Leslie Anderson, if you want to introduce yourself and tell us why you're interested in serving on the Art Design Board.
Sure.
Don't tell us why you want to serve on the Arts Council Board, because you're not.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm Leslie Anderson. I'm the curator of European, American, and Regional Art at the Utah Museum of Fine Arts. I've been a museum professional for 8 years, and I've been in this particular capacity at the Utah Museum of Fine Arts for 4 years. So I think that as an art museum curator, I see the public art program as one that is a museum without walls, and it would be a way in which I can draw on my area of expertise, my professional experience, and contribute to civic improvement. I think that public art stimulates creativity, and it beautifies the environments in which we live and work, and so I can think of no more noble of a cause.
Great. Any questions for Leslie? Okay, thank you so much for your willingness to serve. Your name is going to be on the consent agenda next door during our formal meeting. You're welcome to stay, but you don't need to. And we thank you for your willingness to serve.
Thank you so much.
Okay. All right, so Jared Scott Jones is going to serve on the Arts Council Board. So if you want to introduce yourself and tell us why you're interested in that board, we would love to hear it.
Yeah, good evening. So I've been in the military for 20 years and served my nation, and I've enjoyed it, but I've not had a chance to kind of serve closer to home, and I wanted to do that via the Arts Council. I have a long history. I'm an Army brat with a structured environment, but I've always loved the creative side of things. And I kind of pursued a creative arts education and wanted to give to the community in a way that allows the creative side of me to do that and serve the greater city. So
great.
That's it in a nutshell.
Questions or comments for Jared? Councilmember Mendenhall.
I see on your application that you're an aviator. Will you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I'm a helicopter pilot for the National Guard, and I fly the Apache.
Thank you. Thank you for your service.
No problem.
All right, so same goes for you. You're welcome to attend the formal meeting, but the consent agenda comes up at the end, so you don't need to stick around for it. But thank you for your willingness, and we look forward to hearing from it. Oh, and Councilmember Wharton.
So why the art board?
So I have always had
the Arts Council Board, excuse me.
I've always had a affinity for the arts. Growing up, I grew up in Park City, was of course home to Sundance, and I enjoyed that experience. Later pursued a degree in TV and film. I was the kid always drawing in class. I just like the arts in numerous capacities, and it's just a different outlet for me than what I currently do, and it still allows me to serve the community.
Great. Well, thank you for your service in the past and in anticipation of your service on the board. So
thank you.
Thanks.
Great. Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much.
Have a good evening.
So this is where I got confused, because we do have 3 Housing Advisory and Appeals Board spots. So if we could have all of you come up to the table, we will interview all of you at the same time. Ross Wentworth, John A. Nardone, and Amanda Whiteley. All right, so let's just have each of you introduce yourselves and tell us about your interest in the Housing Advisory and Appeals Board.
Okay, I'm Amanda Whiteley. I'm interested in the board because I currently work in the housing area. I work with homeless prevention and rapid rehousing. And I think that housing is kind of at a pivotal point right now, and I love living in Salt Lake, and I think that it's really awesome that I could potentially be a part of helping the city move towards the different areas in housing.
Great, thanks.
Hi. 3 reasons that I'm interested in serving on the board. One is I think it's valuable. I've lived in lots of different cities. I've seen other different ways, different kinds of solutions to address housing needs. Second reason is I love Salt Lake so much so that I moved back here, and I've been finding more and more ways to involve myself, beginning with involving myself in my community council. Third is I think there will be, it seems like there's a component of evaluating the statute and how we enforce things, and I consider myself to be fair, diplomatic, and inquisitive. So I think those might be helpful traits in this capacity.
Great, thank you. Questions for any of the 3?
Boy, I
my
almost got
gosh.
through this.
You're just in it.
Thank you.
Hi, Ross Wentworth. I'm a longtime city resident, practicing architect, slowly fading away from the office, maybe retiring this year. And I think my wife would like me to find something to keep me busy. But this feels like a good way to give back and stay involved with the city.
I apologize for trying
That's
to
okay.
skip,
With
trying to
2
skip over you, Mr. Wentworth.
great women up here, you didn't notice that I was even here.
Great.
I do, Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Mendenhall.
Amanda, I'm interested in your volunteer or your community service with the Red Light Ministry. Was that in Utah?
Yeah, it's with my local church. It's in Rose Park area.
Awesome. I would love to learn more about that. And I just want to vouch for Janae because she's amazing, and she cleans it up at our community council meetings and knows how to make a very fair and equitable conversation happen. So I'm not sure that the board we're appointing you to needs that kind of effort. I've never been to those meetings, but I know you're going to be a great addition. So thanks all 3 of you for volunteering. Board appointments are the best part of this job.
Okay, same goes for you 3. You're on the consent agenda. We appreciate your willingness to serve. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, golf. Yes. So, item number 5 on our agenda, the fiscal year 2019-20 budget, golf fund. Jennifer Bruno and Allison Rowland are going to sit at the table. Allison will be leading this, leading out on this conversation. They'll be joined by Lisa Schaefer, Noel Walkinshaw, and Matt Kammeyer.
Somebody tell me what page in the budget book this is on. I was trying to find it, and
Actually, a few different places, so it might help to know what kind of aspects you're interested in.
figure
the
that out.
staff report might be a good way to start, and then I'll let you know the different pages. I'll find them.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
Yes.
I think in the interest of time, we'll just pass it right on over to the Golf Fund people, including Noel from Public Services.
That sounds great to me. You've solved all the golf issues before we dive into it, right?
Yes, in that we have Matt Kammeyer this year, someone who really knows a lot about golf, and so we'll just keep shuffling down. We've got a presentation. We'll go through our presentation quickly, and then hopefully answer a few questions and get you off to dinner.
Great, thank you. My name again is Matt Kammeyer. I was appointed to the golf director position in December, and so I'm excited for the opportunity to talk about golf with you today. Golf, we manage 6 different golf facilities with 7 courses. Each course is co-managed by a head golf professional, PGA certified head golf professional, and a course superintendent. Shortly after I was hired, I filled my previous position as associate golf director with Kelsey Chugg. I'm excited to have her on board, and also hired 2 additional positions that we had vacant. So this is the first time that golf has been fully staffed in several years. So we're excited to be able to kind of hopefully address a lot of the issues that exist. Things aren't always as rosy as we'd like them to be, but I do appreciate the discussion that I've had so far with the administration, and I look forward to having a good conversation with you as well. Provided a brief snapshot here of some different highlights from golf. We maintain over 1,012 acres of what I would say open space, which are 7 golf courses, 108 golf holes. We average about 380,000 golf rounds. That's a 5-year average. Our loyalty discount program has 2,700 members in it. The percentage of our reservations made online are 22%. We have a very robust marketing system. We have 34,000 email addresses in our database. We have 24,000 social media followers and nearly 10,000 app downloads for our golf app. I feel like our tournaments are well represented. We have 16 Utah Golf Association tournaments every year, nearly 1,000 men's league participants, and a very robust women's league, which has 520 participants, which is a very good number considering only about 18% of our play comes from females. And so that's one area of emphasis that we're trying to put is how do we attract and retain our female players. This is a summary of our rounds that we've had. These are fiscal year rounds for the last 7 years, from fiscal year 12 through fiscal year 18. You'll notice a drop-off between fiscal year 15 and 16. That's represented by the closure of Wing Point and the Jordan River Par 3. This slide here represents fiscal year golf rounds by course over the last several years. I would say that our rounds have been somewhat flat if you take into consideration the closure of those 2 courses. Over the last 2 years, we've started to see what I think is a rebound. Mountain Dell, Bonneville, and Glendale specifically have done very well. Rose Park has made a resurgence in the last year and a half. Forestdale is still flat with their rounds, and Nibley Park is the one that we're still struggling with. When we entered into the fall of this year, we were riding kind of a high wave of a massive increase in play. We were about 14% ahead of our projections when we completed November and headed into the winter. However, as you can see, it's been raining nonstop, it feels like, in 2019. And so those are things that obviously we cannot control. I would like to talk about today some things that we can control. I've provided here some brief, what I call our division direction statements. This is different from a mission statement. These are basically the why of what we're doing. One of them is to grow the game. We want to help develop programs that introduce new segments of players to the sport and foster a love and respect for the traditions and values of the game. We want to develop our talent. We want to provide improved employee training and leadership opportunities, resulting in increased efficiencies in customer service. We want to be able to improve the assets that we have. One of the major challenges that I've noticed over the 18 years that I've been with the city is there has not been much, if any, investment into any of these, what I consider our community assets, the physical structures themselves, the irrigation systems. We find ourselves at the end of life cycle for a lot of these systems that just have not been maintained or invested in the way that they need to over the years. So we're trying to find the different ways that we can improve the appearance, the playability, functionality, and efficiency of these city-owned courses and clubhouses. And finally, we want to be a community partner. We want to seek opportunities to responsibly integrate golf assets and programs into the community, providing increased value to both golfers and non-golfers. To go a little bit more into growing the game, a lot of the instructional programs that we have are designed around getting junior golfers into the game. We serve usually about 1,000 kids every year through our own junior golf program, through the First Tee of Utah at Rose Park, and also the newly formed First Tee of Utah at Glendale, which is taught and staffed by Salt Lake City police volunteers. We have a very robust women's clinics. In fact, right now, all of our openings are currently booked, and so I've challenged our golf professionals to try to provide more openings and opportunities there, because I think that's an area we really do need to focus on. What has been included in the packet as well is a concept of a player development area on what used to be the previous back 9 at Rose Park. Again, this is just a conceptual project, but what it does is to provide an expanded driving range and a modular player development area, which would include an advanced player development area, an intermediate player development area, and a free player development area, as well as an expanded picnic area where the trail intersects behind Rose Park there. Would like to spend more time talking about this at a future date, but wanted to at least provide the conceptual drawings. Again, we want to try to develop our talent. We're going to be able to do this through leadership and accountability training, through customer service benchmarking, to be able to pay attention to what else is happening in the market and see how our employees stack up. We're also participating in the Public Services Workplace Evolution Planning process. A lot of our golf employees have been around for quite a long time, and within 5 years of 60% of them retiring. So we're wanting to be able to provide opportunities for our assistants and to be able to provide training to develop people to be able to take over those roles. We want to be able to, again, improve the assets as best we can, whether that's, at this point, just painting even. And so over the last year, we've made 3 pro shop renovations. We've been able to remodel 4 clubhouse bathrooms. We had an emergency sewer mainline replacement at Glendale, and we've also had to replace irrigation controllers at Glendale, Mountaindale, and Rose Park. Again, these are examples of some things that are the result of some, I would say, a lack of investment in these assets. And finally, to being a community partner, we host several charity golf events at multiple golf courses. I've given an example here of one that we typically have at Rose Park, which we're having at Glendale now for the Salt Lake Mission. It goes to benefit the homeless. We've donated over 136 free rounds of golf to aid local charity fundraising events and efforts. We provide free instruction for a clinic called Saving Strokes for stroke survivors at Nibley Park. We host a weekly Links to Freedom Disabled Veterans League at Rose Park, and Rose Park is also the 20-year host site for the Special Olympics of Utah. One thing that we wanted to, and I've heard in previous council discussions, is there's been a need to understand the costs of maintaining a golf course in relation to something you can compare it with. So what does it cost to maintain a city park? So what I've provided here is a breakdown of what it costs to maintain different tiers of public parks, and then I will go compare those to what it costs to maintain a golf course. So for instance, there's 3 different tiers. So a manicured park is some kind of a park that's programmed. We're talking Liberty Park, Pioneer, Jordan. You've got ball fields there. I've also given you specific examples of the cemetery and the regional athletic complex. These are costs based on a per acre basis. So for instance, the cemetery is $15,928 to maintain an acre, whereas the regional athletic complex is $9,369. A low maintenance tier is a non-programmed park space, and a natural park is anything that's an open space or trails. And so you can see that it runs from a high of $15,928 down to a low of $1,092. Again, that's the cost per acre. So here are our golf course maintenance costs per acre, and I've tried to keep this as close to apples as I could get. I've not included the cost to operate our retail operations out of the pro shops, but I've also loaded this up with our admin costs as well. So you can see each golf course is broken out by acreage, and you can see the cost per acre. So for the total just under 1,012 acres that we have in golf, which is $4,610,000 for our maintenance costs with administrative costs included, gives us a $4,555 per acre, cost per acre, which as you could compare that to other parks is somewhat eye-opening there. And as part of this budget, there's going to be a general fund contribution of just under $1.3 million. And you may ask, what does that buy? Where is that going? If you apply this same formula here, and after you include the revenue that the golf courses make, you're looking at a cost per acre after projected revenue of $1,288 per acre. So I think there's multiple values of, if you want to look at it that way, that's a very cost-effective way of maintaining open space. In the interest of time, I won't go through these key changes. You already have those, but these are the basic part of the proposed budget that has been submitted to you. We'll go ahead and take questions.
Questions, comments?
Mr. Chair, this is great stuff. This is information for me that I haven't seen over years that we've asked for. So, to see the breakdown of what it costs after revenue and before revenue, for me, that's huge. So I really appreciate that. My question for you is, when you look at a general fund subsidy and you went out and you looked at the research, I guess it was our staff, right, that did it? Or was it city staff, whoever it was, that went out and found out that there really isn't a municipality that isn't, doing a subsidy for general funds. So there's not a single municipality out there that they went and looked at that found that they were actually being able to maintain their golf courses with the enterprise fund itself. So that was eye-opening as well. So for me, this is great information for us to use.
Thank you, Councilmember Rogers. Councilmember Mendenhall.
Just as a response to that, I said the same thing, James, and then I said that doesn't necessarily mean this is a best practice. I mean, just because other cities are dealing with an issue doesn't mean it's a best practice.
It's the only practice, right?
So can you give us an update on the RFP for Nibley and where that conversation is at on the public-private?
I can do that. So we did an RFP for Nibley. The RFP was sort of reaching for the golden goose, right? We put out with the hopes to develop some kind of a golf entertainment center is what we called it. What we brought to the table was land. We brought no other resources to the table in that because we don't have any other resources other than land. And we received no responses. Mm-hmm. And so what we're at now with that is we've initiated a petition to start working with South Salt Lake because during the course of discovery on this project, we learned that the driving range for Nibley Park is in South Salt Lake. They didn't know that. Their property boundaries, their political boundaries, all of that show that it's in Salt Lake City, but we show that it's in South Salt Lake. I tried hard to make an argument. I went back in time, looked at all of that. I can't see when the property lines were drawn, but we're looking at doing that. It was confusing. It was confusing, yeah.
Did you dress appropriately?
I did. I still have my
period
tie.
clothing.
Yeah. So we're sort of trying to regroup with what to do with that at this point. I think that there are some other models that are available to do that. We've got a new concessions happening there, and we've cleaned up the clubhouse there. We're hopeful that that will help support additional business, and I think that we'll just kind of keep working at that and coming up with a new plan B.
So are you going back to the drawing board with it? Because my memory is they would make like 25 cents on every dollar, yeah, and all the capital costs would be on that entity.
Right.
So I'm not surprised nobody bid on it because that's kind of crazy. That they'd do all the work, build everything out, and they'd make a quarter of the profits.
They were to take 75%, and they would have taken all of the rounds money. 75% of the rounds money was going to come to us. The retail sales, the rentals, and all of that would have gone to them. All the liquor sales and all of that would have gone to them. But you're right. It was, but that's where I think we're at the point where we don't have any money to bring to the table.
But we would have percentage of revenue sharing to negotiate with.
We could, yeah.
Are you going back to the drawing board on the offer?
I think we are. I think we need to go back and try to see where that happy ground is. I can't say what it's going to be at this point in time because we just haven't gone to it. It doesn't feel like what we were looking for was going to work.
I guess I'm curious. I mean, this is my 6th budget. This is your 8th budget, Charlie, and we keep giving money from the general fund despite some people's frustrations. And so I guess I'm curious if we had a business proposal that said, look, if you'll bring X amount of money to this conversation, then we're going to be able to create this asset that's going to produce this revenue.
Okay.
And I think the proposal that the city put out there was pretty obviously a bad deal, and that's why nobody applied for it. And yet we still keep putting general fund dollars into the golf fund. So it's not like we don't have any money to bring to the table, because we actually are bringing money to the table for other aspects of golf.
Sure.
So I guess I'm more interested in a dialogue really with the business community about what would it take to make this both attractive to a business operator and profitable. And if it talks about some sort of capital contribution from us, I'd like to know what that is.
Okay. Happy to do it. Councilmember Valdemoros, then Councilmember Johnson, Councilmember Wharton.
I think Eric kind of answered the question that I had. It was exactly when you said, I don't have any money, but I have land. I didn't see the proposal, so I guess you kind of answered the quarter to the dollar and stuff like that. So I would like to revisit that if it was really this bad of a deal, but it was kind of obvious that nobody's going to take it, to revisit and see what else can we put on the table. Doesn't have to be funding, but it has to be a better deal overall. So yeah, I would like to see that.
Mr. Chair, I know we didn't do priorities this year due to a lot of other things. We've continued on some other priorities. I would see our discussion of parks, golf, and open space as one discussion. I would like to propose that we as a council would make that a priority after this budget discussion is done, and take that on as a whole. It'll take a while. I think it'll take a lot of discussions with multiple parts of the city to do that, and exterior entities. But I'm not sure we're going to get any closer until we have a bigger discussion about how we manage this structurally in the city. And then if that will include a discussion of revenue and how do we pay for all this.
And Councilmember Johnston, that's certainly something that I support having us talk about. I am reluctant at this point to say, yes, that will be, our priority after the budget. But what I can commit is that I'm good with having that discussion, and I do think that combining it makes sense because there's a lot that needs to be done and discussed.
Mr. Chair, if you don't mind,
yes.
Just from a staff perspective, we'll need to rely heavily on information and data from the administration in order to facilitate that discussion. So to a certain extent, the timing will depend on when that information can be made available and all that stuff. So I just wanted to flag that for the council too.
Councilmember Wharton.
Just, I love the ideas about Rose Park, but I just don't see how any of those can be funded, especially given the fact that we haven't gotten a response from the RFP for Nibley. So tell me more about what your thoughts are there and how any of that would be funded?
Well, it would be funded partially between if you look at the map here, there's a section of property where the current driving range has been discussed of having that property sold to parks to do some additional programming there, potentially for a youth and family community center / clubhouse area. So there's some funds that will come from that to help with the development. But we ultimately will need to partner with at least 2, if not more, partners to be able to help with the development of the player development areas. So again, I think there's an opportunity for there based on the uniqueness of the area and the fact that there isn't anything like this in this part of the country. There's other parts of the country where they do have something similar. Again, our goal is to not only to grow the game, but to also make that part of that course more connected into the community. There's money that's been set aside for a development of the trail around. Initially, it was for the front 9 and the back 9, but as we looked at it, there was not a safe configuration on the front 9. And on the back 9, there still, in my opinion, are some issues that we have to deal with safety. With this development of this player area, we could work a little more in concert with how that trail is aligned and make it much more safe for the community and tie it in a little bit better and make that probably a much more successful endeavor than it currently is. But I agree, we can't, the city has to be able to put up some investment itself to be able to help develop some of these things. But I think that's why we're trying to, at least in the Rose Park area, we're trying to see what opportunities exist for creating greater access for the community rather than just having it be a golf amenity, what other things can we offer the public? Whether it's an expanded picnic area for the trail users, have a place to stop off of the Jordan River Trail, to be able to provide a better concessions for them, maybe a place for them to be able to repair their bike, to be able to rent bikes. That's why we're trying to see what kind of opportunities exist here that may bring some funding in outside of a golf-centric activity.
Great. Councilmember Fowler.
Everybody knows how I feel about golf, so Matt, welcome to the team. And I do want to say one of the things that is important that you just mentioned was the community space that our golf courses and our golf clubhouses give us. And I want to thank Director Schaefer for meeting with some of my community members to look at how we can use Forestdale Clubhouse in the wintertime as a community space and really open that up to our community and kind of fix a dilemma we were having in a different area of Sugar House. And so being able to utilize that as another community asset. And I appreciate Director Schaefer for taking the time to kind of be creative with me on that project and with our constituent and continue that conversation. So, and thank you for this information, and like I said, welcome.
Councilmember Mendenhall.
I think this dovetails nicely with the Forestdale asset of the building there. How are you contemplating in getting more beer onto our golf courses?
In place of secondary water?
It might be cheaper.
Less expensive.
Seriously.
Beer. More beer on the golf course.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, that's a conversation we've had in the past before you were at the table, I think. And when we've looked at creative approaches other cities around the country have taken to increasing player rounds played, I should say, or attracting different clubs and groups and events and things was a lot. There's a lot of beer going on to golf courses. Or maybe I should phrase it this way, Director Schaefer, what barriers are there to us getting more beer onto our golf courses?
I could speak to one that relates to sort of.
Wait, I've been wanting to talk about beer all day. Sorry. I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
We'll talk about it later.
No, yeah, go ahead.
One of the things that we hear often is that the clubhouses and the facilities and stuff should be more like a community restaurant. And so I'm kind of been trying to sort through that idea a little bit more. You know, the way our zoning and ordinance sits, that the facilities and the restaurants and the clubhouse itself is really intended to serve golf patrons. So that's an area where I would like to maybe have more of a conversation around, you know, how strict do we need to be about that, or can we open up the advertising for neighborhoods and for other folks to be more inviting?
And I think about from a business perspective, you'd look at a decrease in people accessing the courses, same as it is everywhere in the nation, basically. And you'd say, well, then perhaps we have that much extra capacity in the facilities that we built to serve a greater population. So is there some way, from a business perspective, that we can fit even a walk-up kind of a situation? I know that there's state laws around how we corral beer drinkers, but
I appreciate the question, and I also appreciate Noel's intro to that, because that is one of the barriers. So if you're asking what the barrier is, I think we need to address open space rules around concessions within those spaces, and whether or not the concessions are there to serve the specific use, or whether or not we can open that conversation up. So that is one of the areas that we really need to look at. Another barrier that we're really trying to tackle is attracting the right kind of concessions vendors in our golf courses. And one of the barriers to that is our investment in our facilities. Our facilities are not going to attract the kind of businesses that we want to have in there. And so we would have to, we're tying it back to that previous conversation about what do we bring to the table. If we were able to bring to the table a facility that attracted a local brew pub or a really hot restaurant, or someone that maybe would attract a different clientele, that would be an amazing way to start bringing in more revenue from food and beer and liquor sales than we currently have access to.
So I'm going to throw this out here, and Amy and I are often on opposite sides of the golf discussion, but I have a prediction that we're going to be on the same side on this one, which is that I get that money is the issue with golf all the time. We have older facilities. They don't necessarily have the kind of kitchen or facilities that could host a small neighborhood gathering, watering hole type of amenity. But I think that we've been asking for the administration to look outside the box on how to address this issue. And I wonder about doing some kind of a design competition or something creative around like a couple of the clubhouses that we have, and a way to integrate a more substantial food and beverage component to serve the population that's coming there to golf, people who are going to meet up there before or hang around after they play. And whether we're talking to like Fillings and Emulsions on Main Street in my district, or Trestle Tavern up at 15th and 15th, we know from businesses all over the city, when you get beer on the menu, you get some alcohol on the menu, 40%-ish increase in revenues.
No, absolutely.
So
yeah.
I think that if we could be creative about the way that we can get that kind of activation of golf courses happening, maybe from a design competition standpoint, I'm just throwing that out there, then
I love the
it's
idea.
going to pay.
I love the idea, and what I heard you say earlier is that if we brought a proposal to you that included some kind of funding, then you would consider that. So maybe if we did a design competition type of idea around food and beverage at a specific or a targeted couple of golf courses, then the bill to incorporate that design is something you would consider.
And that's something I'd consider much more than a full build of a new like facility to host weddings or something. Because back to our year of PTSD from, what was it, 5 years ago?
Let's not go there.
Think about it, but
this is fun.
We looked a lot at golf courses that have invested millions of dollars to have those kind of party facilities, basically, and they're not making the money that we would need to be making. So yes, more creative and more surgical.
Okay.
Okay, very, very quick. Councilmember Valdemoros and then Councilmember Fowler.
So Aaron, are you saying that what you look at this, when looking at this additional uses of these open spaces, that this would create some revenue to offset the cost? Or are you looking at this, we need to offset the cost completely? Or you'd be okay with, if we can offset a little bit of the cost, then I'm good. Is that what you're saying?
I don't think we know yet how much it could offset the costs that we're filling through the general fund every year now, but I would love to learn. Okay. And I think that when we talk about creating new or additional public benefits, that I'll tell you my perspective of neighborhood bars has been an incredible sense of community building when the council years ago moved to do that. And I think the golf courses could complement that.
Yeah, and I think I'm a full proponent of keeping these open spaces and having additional uses for the non-golfers like myself, for example. I mean, there are many other activities to have at these golf courses. So I would, I support that. I mean, I'm interested in seeing that we continue, subsidizing these golf courses in a way, but however, I would be interested in looking at offsetting some of this. I don't think it needs to be $1 million for a new kitchen to be there. It could be a smaller amount, like seed money, like what happened with Square Kitchen, even smaller than that. And I think we might have some takers if there was some of it in there. However, I don't think we're gonna, it's not gonna cover the cost of one of the parks. So we should forget about that. And
Councilmember Fowler, before you go, this is a good conversation. I hate being the one to have to hit the damper button on it, but what we're trying to do is get through the stuff that we need to get through for this budget. There's no way that we're going to be able to figure this piece out. So it's certainly, I think the alcohol piece is something that that we ought to look at. You know, one of the questions that I would have is you know, what rules are there that would prohibit a beer cart or something else on the course that would just drive around? I know that some places have those. I don't think in Utah. We do?
Yeah.
Okay.
There are carts that go around.
At our courses?
Yes.
Yeah.
We have city beer licenses
Huh.
too.
All of them.
So they all, so you have, they're actually driving around?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you, how, okay. All right, well, then never mind. So Councilmember Fowler.
I agree. I think that the question is, and thank you, Aaron, this conversation is very different than it was last year, which I appreciate. I got you, boo. But I agree that these are other questions that I think we still have to talk about, and I think that's why Andrew sort of proposed having this priority after the budget. With that, I would also propose a city council golf tournament. So that's on the table, gauntlet thrown.
Will, and Councilmember Fowler, would part of that, include park rangers serving drinks?
Park rangers.
Yeah. Oh, well, camp hosts, park rangers, whatever we're going to call them. Okay, any other issues that we need to know before the
think so.
budget? Okay.
I would just say that we played in the year-end golf tournament, and when you're picking your teams, pick Lisa, because she has really got a good drive.
And
Dark
for
horse.
for every other person who's going to be presenting on behalf of the administration, Noel just made it much, much harder for all of you because he was willing to go back in time. And I haven't heard anyone else, you know, express any willingness to do that. So
It was
Noel,
6 hours in the recorder's office, looking at microfilm.
He hasn't been the same since.
Okay, so we're going to do announcements and report of the chair and vice chair after the formal meeting. So at this point, I will look for a motion to go into a closed session to discuss labor. Do we need to restate that in a formal motion? Okay, who would make that motion?
Mr. Chair, I move that we go into a formal session for the, to a closed session for the purpose of discussing labor relations.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Wharton, second by Councilmember Rogers. Councilmember Johnson. Wharton?
Yes.
Mendenhall? Rogers?
Yes.
Fowler? Yes. Valdemoros? And I'm a yes. So we are in closed session. We will
Thank you all.
plan on meeting the formal meeting at 7:15 across the hall. And